emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
Podcast. That good?
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you.
Welcome to the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, where we stare deep into the abyss of Atari's last home video game console and its library, and the abyss stares back. And we say unto the abyss, "Hey abyss, how's it going?" And the abyss replies,
"Can't complain. You?"
And we reply, "Doing well, thank you." And this is going great, not weird at all. So we say, "Are there any Jaguar games down there that we haven't covered yet on the podcast?" And the abyss replies,
"Are you kidding? Lots. What kind of game would you like?"
And then we say unto the abyss, "I sure could go for a garage-shaded polygon shooter. Do you have anything like that?" And the abyss says,
"Certainly."
And then without trying to look for any deep philosophical meaning behind this conversation, because there really isn't any, Nietzschean or otherwise, we receive part number J9043, iWar. iWar is a 3D shooting and exploration game for 1 or 2 competitive players, developed by Magitech Design and published by Atari in December of 1995. It carries an ESRB rating of K to A, kids to adults, ages 6+. Magitech Design's history I covered in episode 5 of this podcast. That's the Raiden episode if you wanted to go back and check it out. And one of iWar's programmers, Andrew Seed, I talked about him both in episode 6, Dino Dudes, and episode 11 for Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales. The other programmer, Carl West, I don't think I've mentioned him yet. Let's fix that. Mr. West also worked on Bubsy, he did the bosses in that game, and prior to that worked on the air combat simulator Strike Aces on the Amiga for the company Vector Graphics. That's spelled VEKTOR and GRAFIX. And later, the motorcycle racing game Team Suzuki, I believe for Gremlin Graphics, who decided to spell their name correctly. Now, these two games are both 3D polygon-based, and this would be a factor in iWar's development. After Bubsy and iWar on the Jaguar, Mr. West worked on programming for the RC car racing game Buggy on Windows. This game is actually available on Steam for about $5 last I checked, so if you wanted to party like it's 1998, there's a link in the show notes. I see that Mr. West also did some work for Ideas Pad Limited out of Manchester, working on Puzzler Mind Gym 3D for the Nintendo 3DS. Ideas Pad. I wonder if he also worked on Trailblazer for the PSP. This was another Ideas Pad game, kind of a modern update of the classic 8-bit computer game, and this PSP version is one I've been thinking about getting for a few years now. That kind of wraps up the developer part of my outline. It's super easy. A lot of it's been done already in past episodes. So let's move on to the actual development of iWar. Andrew Seed and Carl West were thinking about what kind of game they could make that would leverage the Jaguar's capabilities with 3D ground-shaded polygons, and thought a futuristic combat racing game sounded promising. The name of the game was Dreadnought, and this game first appeared in the December 1994 issue of Atari Explorer Online, reported to be a CD-ROM title. Now, Magitech had the Jaguar CD development hardware available from the start, but Mr. Seed wasn't terribly impressed with it, and besides, why limit your potential market to people who owned both the Jaguar and the CD-ROM unit? So Atari Explorer Online was mistaken here. There was never any intention to put Dreadnought on a CD. Part of Dreadnought's game concept was that you would earn coins as you drove, and then use these coins to buy weapons. You had 3 different vehicles to choose from, different sizes, and had to decide between speed and the ability to carry weapons and armor. As the game evolved, so did the name. Atari Explorer Online reported a name change from Dreadnought to Redemption in the beginning of 1995, and this title held possibly as long as June 22nd of 1995, appearing under the name Redemption on a working software release schedule sent out by Atari's Don Thomas to the Central Atari Information Network in the Cleveland Freenet community. However, Atari Explorer Online noted an additional name change as early as May 20th of 1995 from Redemption to Net War. Release was tentatively scheduled for November of that year. In August, the erroneous CD-ROM designation was formally dropped, with Atari Explorer Online reporting that Net War would be released on cartridge instead of CD. September rolls around, and AEO reports another name change, this time to iWar, stylized capital I-WAR. Atari came up with the name. I was able to acquire the source code to an early version of Net War. The source files say that this is version 5.6, but that version string wasn't ever updated past 5.6 and exists as such in the final build. But there are a lot of goodies in this code, including some notes built into the game. So compile the source code, load it onto an Alpine or whatever, and you could flip through pages of notes with the D-pad. This was done to help communication between Magitech and Atari. There's no shared source control repo back then, no Git or Bitbucket or even SourceForge. So without something like branch commit messages that you'd find on a modern project, these hard-coded notes provided a way for Atari's testers and producers to keep up to date with how the game is progressing. For example, Override was not always the enemy. There was a change made to this effect in the Attract mode storyline. Explosion debris in general was reduced. Leading zeros in the high score table were removed, and there was a level timer at one point, which was removed. You can see where that code is commented out of the heads-up display. The levels used to be simply numbered, level 1, level 2, but the term level was changed to node, and there's the promise that each node would have a unique name, rather than simply a number, which is what happened. The developers had to free up memory to make room for speech, and in the Datalink sequence, your tank used to be some sort of flying craft instead. The Datalink sequence, by the way, was a late addition requested by Atari, who wanted a kind of mini-game included. This minigame was inspired by a 1994 Amiga title called Super Stardust, which featured a 3D tunnel-like sequence as part of the game design. Atari had other requests, of course, textures being a big one, so instead of a game made up entirely of 3D shaded polygons, Atari wanted polygons with textures as well. As I've mentioned in past episodes, the Jaguar isn't great at texture mapping, so there were definite drawbacks, but I'll cover all that later. Also, don't worry if you don't understand any of these game elements yet. Tanks, Datalink, what? Consider it, I guess, flavor for what's to come. There are also some technical notes here in the source code, like how the GPU code runs faster when the Motorola 68000 processor is stopped. So stop the 68K and wait for the GPU to do its thing, then start the 68K back up. Additionally, taking jumps out of the code for drawing shaded polygons would increase performance, but at the cost of duplicate code. There needs to be room in the GPU RAM for that. This batch of source is incomplete. It's missing all kinds of assets, so we can't take it as is and compile a work-in-progress build, as cool as that would be. But it's good stuff, especially if you grok the Jaguar's architecture and the assembly code needed to make it do things. I don't, so I'll have to move on. During the game's evolution, instead of shopping for weapons with coins, you would encounter weapons on the playfield and pick them up. The shop itself was reduced to a non-interactive screen that you see before you enter a level, or a node, and this screen shows how your tank is equipped. There are tons of references to the shop in the source code, and the music that plays in this section is appropriately named Shop, so that lives on. I saw a report that iWar, or NetWar, or Redemption was shown off at Atari's Fun and Games press event on June 20th, 1995, but looking at Adam Urbano's two-part report of this event for Atari Explorer Online, he didn't mention iWar in any of its naming incarnations, so I can't confirm or deny the game's existence there, or what kind of state it was in at the time. There was also a rumor going around that iWar contained networking support, using the Jaguar's voice modem, but this was never actually a consideration. The same goes for the Jaglink. iWar was always meant to be a single console game. The music in iWar was done by Alistair Lindsay and Kevin Seville. Mr. Lindsay you may know from other Jaguar game soundtracks such as Tempest 2000, Defender 2000, Raiden, Evolution Dino Dudes, and Bubsy in Fractured Furry Tales. Kind of a who's who of awesome Jaguar game soundtracks, right? Except maybe Raiden. Now, fun fact, these two musicians collaborated on another game called iWar. Independence War, the Starship Simulator, was a Windows game developed by Particle Systems and released in 1998, for which Imagitech did the music. Atari actually allowed the use of the name iWar here. I've got a couple more coincidences about this alternate iWar. First, the class of ship that you control in this game is called a Dreadnought. And the second coincidence is that the game was published by Infogrames, which, of course, is now known as Atari, or Atari SA. Now, I wonder, if the current Atari still held the rights to the name iWar, would they so freely let someone else use it? iWar saw an official release in the second week of December 1995, coinciding with a price drop of the core Jaguar console to $99, and along with 3 other games that I haven't covered yet. One of them is coming up soon, but the others, not for a while. I've got like 15 plus games to cover before I get there. Hey, Bishop. Care to help me out with the iWar narrative?
Certainly.
Cool. So imagine a world where most, if not all humans, depend on some sort of global network. Getting news, sharing information, shopping, banking, logistics, navigation, all rely on this network. And the network is called...
The Internet.
No, the iWay.
Internet sounds better.
And imagine this network is controlled by a master processing facility, a mainframe supercomputer. All humans depend on the network, and the network depends on this facility. It has a name too, and that's...
Google.
No, what kind of silly name is that? Google. No, this facility is called Override, and it is so massive in scale with so much processing power generating so much heat that extreme measures were needed to keep it cool. And therefore, Override is installed in
a large number of geographically distributed data centers.
No, Antarctica, deep beneath the ice.
That's hardcore.
Indeed it is. And it works great. In fact, many years go by, Override is awesome, big success, humanity can rest easy knowing that it's out there at the bottom of the world handling everything for us. And when something works every time, all the time, we humans tend to rely on it more and more.
A flaw that we podcast robots are soon to exploit.
What was that, Bishop?
Nothing at all.
Huh. But wait, something's not right. Override is slower. The whole network is slower. Distributed denial of service attack? No, it's coming from within. Any recent code changes, maintenance, hardware failures? Did we exceed our monthly bandwidth cap and are now getting our transfer rate throttled? No, none of that. What's going on? It's like the whole system is clogged with something. Weird. Engineers are summoned, their cell phones going off in the middle of the night because, of course, this sort of thing would happen at freaking 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning. They VPN in, start frantically writing code to address the issues, band-aids, workarounds, kludges, whatever it takes. They even try turning things off and then back on again, just to get this thing back up and running at full speed. The entire world is depending on it. But it's not enough. CPU cores, GPU cores, all maxed out. Load average is through the roof. I didn't even know it could go that high. Something is terribly, terribly wrong with Override. So it's a good thing we have backups. Wait, where are the backups? The last one is from 16 years ago. Nobody's monitoring this? Oh, great, there's a ticket open. Fat lot of good that does us now. And then, quiet. Too quiet. The system is running, but entirely and utterly unresponsive. How can that be? Alright, we're here with our senior engineers and management, the biggest brains around, plus management. So what can we do? Before it locked us out, we saw that Override was overrun with viruses and corrupted databases. No, not corrupted, mutated. Weird. Somewhere in the meeting room, an engineer instinctively pulls out his cell phone and tries to Google the fix for mutated databases, but it doesn't even load up. Oh yeah, Override's down. He sheepishly puts the phone back in his pocket. If only there's an admin mode, a backdoor into the system where we could... Oh, there is? Good, what do we... A tank program? Wait, hold on now. You built a tank program, but you couldn't, get working backups? Yeah, features are more fun to write than bug fixes, I get that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here is our chance. Send in the tank, gather up all the virus-laden data, destroy the mutated databases, go from node to node if you have to, and take out everything that stands in the way. Override has gone rogue and must be stopped so that we can put it back in order and get everyone's Netflix working again and stuff. We've got one shot at this. Oh, wait, what? Three plus shots at this. The tank can regenerate. Nice feature. Still might have preferred working backups, though. Alright, are we ready? Let's do this. iWar puts you in a virtual tank and sends you through data links into the iWay, where you take down the malfunctioning Override and its defenses while gathering up viruses which are spread throughout the iWay in convenient pod form. There are 20 nodes to clear, followed by a final showdown where you take a bunch of these virus-laden data pods you've been collecting and stuff them right up Override's nose, as it were. You get 3 tanks to start, but you can earn more in bonus stages between the nodes and the occasional in-game pickup. You have 3 different tank styles available to you at the start of the new game: light, medium, and heavy. The light tank is the fastest, but has the lowest amount of shielding. The heavy tank is the slowest, but has the most shielding. And the medium tank has the mediumest speed, and around medium shielding. If you ever buy a t-shirt, like, for example, from the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast store on Redbubble, just a random example I'm throwing out there. If you buy a t-shirt or hoodie or other article of clothing, you'll encounter kind of vague size ratings: small, medium, large, extra large. What does that mean exactly? I like numbers. So when it comes to tank options in iWar, here are the numbers. The light tank has a maximum shield strength of 500 energy units. The medium tank has 750, and the heavy tank 999. In terms of speed, using the light tank as a benchmark, the medium tank has a straight line speed of about 80%, and the heavy tank can travel at about 58% the speed of the light tank. See now, isn't that better? There's another difference too between the 3 tanks, and that's weapons load. The lighter the tank, the fewer the weapons it can carry. The light tank can hold a single laser cannon and a rocket launcher. The medium tank can carry 2 laser cannons and 1 rocket launcher, whereas the heavy tank can carry 2 laser cannons and 2 rocket launchers. There are other weapons and enhancements too, but those largely behave the same across all 3 platforms, and, well, now's as good a time as any to talk about those. There are weapons and other upgrades scattered throughout the nodes, but you start the game with a Mark I laser. Laser is a bit of a misnomer here. These are clearly projectiles that travel below the speed of light, but let's not be pedantic here. There's plenty of time for that later. The Mark I laser fires a single shot at a time. There's no auto-fire here, and the maximum firing rate is likely slower than your maximum button-pushing speed. You may find an upgrade to the Mark II laser, which is a double-shot unit. Instead of a single laser blast at a time, it's 2. On the light tank, the Mark II laser replaces the Mark I. On the medium and heavy tanks, the Mark II laser is added alongside the Mark I, so you get 3 shots at a time. Your lasers have an unlimited shot count. It does not drain your energy at all to fire them, which is a refreshing change if you've just been playing Hover Strike. If you want something with a limited number, try the missile launcher. Each pack that you'll find floating around will contain 20 guided missiles, which can home in on the enemy. Well, sometimes. I've launched large numbers of missiles at airborne targets only to see them angle up and then loop around and nose plant ungracefully on the ground. This is a frustrating change if you've just been playing Hover Strike. But for enemies just around the corner, or if you're on a high platform with enemies below, the missile launcher works pretty well. There are Mark I, Mark II, and Mark III missiles. The difference lies in the warhead. The higher the number, the more they hurt. There's no splash damage, and you can't hurt yourself with a nearby missile strike. Unlike Doom. If you find the not really lasers too puny, try the plasma cannon. It fires a projectile, kind of tadpole-shaped, out in a straight line with an explosive finish on impact. You can charge it up for a more powerful blast by holding down the button, and there's a gauge that indicates the charge. For the Mark I plasma cannon, the gauge goes from 0 to 16. For the Mark II, the maximum yield doubles to 32, and Mark III bumps it up to 48. Either way, a fully charged blast takes about a second to charge. This is not a rapid-fire weapon. Even at the minimum charge, it's pretty slow. Worse yet, you can't start charging up a new plasma round until after the previous one has exploded. If you're tired of falling into enemy traps and would like to set some of your own, there's the mine layer. It places a small beige mine behind your tank, which goes kablamo when an enemy runs into it. Because landmines are terrible devices that can remain active many years after the actual conflict, in iWar, these mines have an expiration date, and that expiration date is about 8 seconds after you drop it. Be warned though, just like in real life, these mines do not discriminate, and you can cause yourself damage by running into them. Each pack of mines that you pick up gives you 20 such devices, and they come in Mark I, Mark II, and Mark III varieties. The difference being the number that you drop at one time. That means with a Mark III mine layer, you'll go through your 20 mines that much faster. If you're the paranoid type and think someone's always trying to sneak up behind you, you're probably right. So there's a rear-facing laser cannon that you can switch to. Alternately called a rear gun, rear laser, or rear turret, this fires a laser bolt out of your backside. It's only available in Mark I, I believe, and may replace the mine layer if you have one at the time. It goes both ways, though. The mine layer may replace your rear turret. Unless you are looking at the radar, you'll only actually see the rear cannon fire if you're in view modes 2, 3, or 5. Just like that other Jaguar game, what's it called? The one where you're on the outside edge of a web, blasting spikers and fuse balls and stuff with your particle laser and super zapper. Anyone? What's this game called? Help me out here.
You are not funny.
Fine, Tempest 2000. I was talking about Tempest 2000. And in that game, you can get an AI droid power-up. In iWar, there's also an AI droid power-up. And in this game, it hovers above your tank and shoots at enemies. It doesn't deal much damage, but it's better than nothing. There are 2 flavors of the AI droid, also called a drone, and that's the Mark I and the Mark II. The difference between them is the number of laser bolts that the drone can shoot out at one time, 1 or 2. Even though the power-up looks different when you pick it up, the thing hovering over your tank always looks like a Mark I unit, a white sphere with blue stripes, or is that a blue sphere with white stripes? The Mark II power-up has different colors, red and orange. These things are not invincible, as it turns out, and can be destroyed by enemies. In my experience, bombers can take these out pretty effectively. When destroyed, they're gone for the rest of the level, or node, but will be replaced when you start the next one. If you encounter another drone pickup in the level, you can of course carry that one until you finish or until it's destroyed, whichever comes first, and you'll start the next level with one drone, not two. It is not possible to downgrade a weapon. You can't go backwards from like a Mark III to a Mark II. In normal gameplay, that shouldn't be possible, except for the mine layer. I was able to find a Mark I and then a Mark III. Later, I encountered what might have been a Mark II, and when I went to pick it up, I got the message saying, weapons cannot be downgraded. Now, by default, your tank can only shoot forward, straight ahead in the direction you're facing. However, if you obtain an auto-targeting upgrade, which looks like an 8-pin integrated circuit, part of your targeting reticle will track an enemy in the vicinity, and that's where your shots will land. It's not super fast, it tends to lag a bit behind fast-moving enemies, but it's still a great upgrade to have, especially against airborne targets. Also, it can usually see your enemies before you do. It's possible to toggle the auto-targeting system on or off with the 6 button on your controller. The reticle will be green when auto-targeting is disabled and red when enabled. Next we have Radar. He's the small-town company clerk stationed with the MASH 477th in the Korean War. Radar is his nickname because he can sense incoming wounded before they actually arrive, and I think he was genuinely much more useful than the radar system here in iWar. The Mark I radar in the game gives you an octagonal scanner in the bottom center of your screen which shows a green dot when there's stuff. It doesn't matter what, enemy, jumper, projectile, teleporter, basically anything that's not a wall shows up as a green dot on the radar, which rotates when you turn your tank. Upgrade to the Mark II radar, also known as the Advanced Radar, and you do get to see some color. Purple dots are teleporters, dim purple dots are jumpers, black dots are data pods, red dots are explosions, and yellow dots can be weapons, tools, switches, even doors. This may sound a whole lot better, but the scanner itself inside the octagon is a dark translucent gray. Finding a black dot in a dark translucent gray octagon is nearly impossible. You'd have to be right next to a light-colored wall or bright floor to make that out. Good thing the black dots don't indicate important items like the data pods you need to collect.
Sarcasm detected.
Darn right. The most important thing you need to find in the game is also the hardest thing to spot on the radar. Let's move on to shields. These are genuinely useful, but for a limited time and in a limited quantity. When you find a Mark I shield power-up, you get 10 uses. Firing up the shield will cause an on-screen indicator to count down from 30. While it's counting down, you're invulnerable. When it reaches 0, you can take damage again. The counter is pretty quick, and in the game that amounts to as little as 2 seconds of actual shield coverage. This can vary, though, for reasons I'll talk about later. After using it, the shield needs to recharge. There's an on-screen indicator for that, kind of an inverse teardrop shape that's solid yellow when fully charged. That's the Mark I shield unit. With a Mark II, you get 20 discharges, and these count down from 60, giving you roughly 3.5 seconds of coverage. With a Mark III, you get 30 discharges, counting down from 90, for about 5 seconds of coverage. The number of shield discharges you get are not cumulative. If you, for example, pick up another Mark III unit, you don't get 30 additional uses, you get 30 total, no matter what. Think of it like swapping out the magazine in a firearm before you've used up all the rounds in the first one. You've got 2 rounds left in your magazine, you drop it, you put in a new one, there's still 2 rounds left on the floor. If you are viewing your tank from a third-person perspective, using the shield will encase your tank in what looks like a sphere made out of mirrors. It's pretty nifty. In the first-person view, though, there's no indication that you're shielded, other than the flashing shield icon and the countdown at the top of the screen. When working through the nodes in the eyeway, you know what? I think I'm just going to call these levels from now on. It's not as accurate, but it feels better. As you work through the levels, you will likely encounter energy pods. These look a whole lot like 9-volt batteries and will restore your tank's energy level to maximum. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that you should not waste these energy pods. If your energy is already pretty close to maximum, save that battery for later. The best time to pick one of these up is when you hear this.
Damage critical.
And see damage critical flashing on the screen in red letters. This seems to happen when your energy level is below 250. The text will continue flashing and you'll continue hearing
Damage critical.
every 8 seconds until your tank is destroyed or you pick up an energy pod. It can be pretty irritating going on and on about how critical your damage is even though
Damage critical.
you know full well that your damage is critical given the energy gauge and flashing text on the screen. And the constant reminder might even put you more on edge
Damage critical.
than you already are, so leave some energy pods behind if you can. Now, that covers the weapons and other supporting systems on your tank, but Override has...
Damage critical.
Stop! Here, have an energy pod. There, better? Okay, so as I was saying, Override has really rolled out the red carpet for you, and that metaphorical carpet is filled with towers, tanks, aircraft, and other hazards that you'll need to fight through to reach the malfunctioning Override itself. So let's play some music and then start learning about those. I'm not going to go through each enemy in detail, but here are the highlights. The Atomic Guardian is a mobile tower-like thing with an arrowhead-shaped head that will stalk you and gun you down. Other towers are stationary but pack a bigger punch. For example, the nuclear gun tower actually has triangular mirrors flanking its missile launcher so that you can see how pretty you look before you're clobbered. Shorter than the towers are the Cat series of missile launchers, the Lion launcher, the Tiger launcher, and the Panther launcher. They don't actually launch cats at you, they launch missiles, and these guys can lay down some serious hurt. For serious hurt on the move, there are 2 mobile versions called the Alpha and Beta mobile launchers. There are several tanks which also follow a naming theme. The Opal, Gemstone, Crystal, Diamond, and Emerald tanks have increasing levels of firepower, shielding, speed, and aggressiveness. These 4 metrics, by the way, are listed both in the manual and within the game itself. The Tomahawk mine layer scurries about, dropping beige-colored mines in its wake. Much like your own mines, these disappear after a few seconds, and though the Tomahawk does seem to have an infinite supply of these, unlike you, if you're patient, you should just wait them out once the layer itself has been destroyed. There's the Tau Phase Shifter, a triangular fellow with skids who has no firepower of his own but will slowly ram into you. A much faster kamikaze is... well, there's a type of mine that splits into 3 parts when you approach and will come at you from multiple angles. There's also something called the Tomcat Homer, which is a different opponent. For those 3-in-1 mines, though, they're pretty easy to take out from a distance before they break apart, so do that if you can. Aircraft include the Lancaster Bomber, which flies overhead, drops a series of painful blue bombs as it goes, and then turns around for another pass. As I said before, these guys are especially good at taking out your AI drones. The Wellington Dropship hovers overhead, bobbing slightly, occasionally flying over and dropping a Wellington drop tank nearby. As soon as you destroy one drop tank, the Wellington is ready to dispatch a fresh one, which will come at you from anywhere, really, so be on the lookout for tanks when you see the dropship nearby. And finally, there's the Bouncing Wallace.
I'm Wallace. The windows.
Not that Wallace. This one is spelled W-A-L-L-I-S. And why is it called Bouncing? Any guesses? This guy is a green and white checkerboard ball that lays in wait. When you approach, it starts bouncing all over the place, sometimes right into you, causing damage. At a certain distance, it'll stop bouncing and wait for you to get close again. In the early levels, it doesn't have any weapons of its own, but later in the game it does have a single red laser that it'll fire off as it bounces around. Sometimes it comes to rest halfway in the ground where you can't hit it. Other times it's completely above ground and you can easily destroy it as long as you don't get too close. The bouncing Wallace will outmaneuver both your auto-targeting system and your AI drone, so they can be really difficult to hit, and are especially irritating when there are multiple Wallaces bouncing around. The I-Way environment itself poses a few hazards of its own. There are two other kinds of mines that I'd like to talk about. One is the Patriot mine. It kind of has wings and fins that hovers in place, bouncing and rotating slowly. These are indestructible. You can't shoot them. Well, you can shoot them, but nothing happens, and your auto-targeting and AI systems won't even try. Another indestructible thing is the Spiky mine. These aren't listed in the manual. I don't know what they're supposed to be called, but they're shaped like squat silver pyramids with spikes sticking out of the sides, and they'll drain your health quickly if you come into contact with them, or really get anywhere close to them. How quickly? Here's what it sounds like when a light tank with full energy meets one of these spiky guys. Stay far, far away from these. There's a reflecting tower, a spinning cylinder with vertical light and green stripes. Shooting this will cause your lasers to bounce off in different directions, possibly into your tank itself, which hurts. There are magnets, horseshoe-shaped magnets with glowing tips that'll suck your tank in, possibly toward a mine or some other hazard.
It certainly does suck!
There are bumpers on the ground. Now, if you run into a wall, you'll bounce back a bit, but running into a bumper, even at a slow speed, will knock you back a lot, also possibly into a mine or some other hazard. Similar to the bumpers, but more aggressive, are the spinners. These are blue circles of spikes that spin rapidly and knock you about if you touch them. You'll sometimes see them in clusters, and the good news is that, like the bumpers, they don't hurt you when you touch them. But the bad news is that, like the bumpers, they might fling your tank somewhere unpleasant. Finally, there are the lightning gates. Again, this is a term I made up. I think in the source code they're called timed barriers or energy barriers. A fierce blue arc of electricity appears horizontally between two triangular emitters. It'll drain your energy rapidly on contact like the spiky guys, but does occasionally open up and give you the ability to pass through. In my testing, 1 out of every 10 cycles is open, so count the buzzes and head on through after you hear 9 of them in a row. These are just some of the elements you'll encounter as you head through the I-Way. I shouldn't ruin all the surprises here, should I? So, after some more music, let's take a look at the levels themselves. There are 20 levels in iWar, and then a separate showdown with Override. Each level consists of between 3 and 15 rooms, and each room has one or more teleporter pads in it. Think of teleporter pads as doors connecting one room to the next, and sometimes this is exactly how they behave. You enter a room, and you can exit the room back whence you came with a nearby teleporter. Other times, though, they don't act like this at all. They're not bidirectional and will drop you in a room with no clear way back. To help you keep track of where you are in the level, you have a map. The map is pretty limited. It shows the rooms, the shape of the rooms, and matching colored squares indicating where teleporter paths connect. When you're close to a teleporter, the squares will start flashing. Think of it as a schematic more than a map. You know going in basically how the level is laid out. That sounds fine, but there's no "you are here" indicator. The only way to tell which room on the map you're actually in is to infer your location given the shape of the room and the flashing of the teleporter squares. Also, as you enter more rooms, more of these matching colored squares will appear, so you can kind of see where you haven't been yet. Most of the time, this inference process works pretty well. Other times, I've seen instances where there are no flashing squares on the map even though there should be, and a few cases where I see more than 2 flashing squares at a time. Maybe this is just Override messing with you. So don't be discouraged that the map isn't as good as, say, the auto map in Doom, but rather think of how much better it is than a paper map, which it is. The teleporter pads themselves look like blue squares with an X-shaped pattern in the middle flashing between red and orange. When you touch it, the old room dissolves and the new one appears. There's a visual technique used throughout the game where the polygons decrease in size to a point, or going in the opposite direction, increase to full coverage. It's used all over to mark transitions between levels or passages or teleporters and for when you pick up a datapod, and I think it looks pretty nifty. Levels also may contain switches. These are big push-button style switches, single pull, single throw, I think. They're green and long when deactivated and red and short when activated. You can toggle a switch by shooting it and it makes this sound. Some switches stay toggled until shot again, and some pop back up after a certain period of time. These can control elements like teleporter pads, activating or deactivating them, and they can control things that I haven't talked about yet, like doors and jumpers. Some switches control things in the same room, some switches control things in different rooms, and some switches, I never actually figured out what they did. But I push them all, because they're like buttons. You can't not push a button, right? It's right there, you gotta push it. This is probably why I'd make a terrible airline pilot. There's another type of switch, one that can be only activated once in one direction by driving over them. These are like bars on the ground that are green when deactivated and red when activated. I think of these like floor switches in Doom, but visible. I seem to be making a lot of references to Doom in this episode so far. Not sure why. This is several episodes ago. Doors. These can join parts of a room together or may seal off a small section where you can find power-ups or datapods. If they're active, they'll automatically open on approach, like in Star Trek. But unlike Star Trek, these doors make a loud noise. Jumpers are textured red squares on the ground. When active, they'll raise up a bit and collapse repeatedly. If you drive your tank over one while it's active, it'll launch you up into the air. And if you had some momentum going in, it'll launch you in that direction, which is good for landing on platforms. You do have a little bit of control in the air, but not really enough to compensate for zero horizontal momentum going in. Your goal, as you go from room to room, using teleporters and jumpers and switches and doors, is to collect datapods. These are green textured objects with a narrow yellow waist. To pick one up, simply run into it. You'll have a counter on the screen to let you know how many datapods are still floating around loose in that level, but unlike Cybermorph, there's no indication of where the next closest pod might be, so it'll take some exploring. Search every room, every corner, every alcove, every warehouse, farmhouse, henhouse, outhouse, and doghouse in each level to find all the datapods. The fewest number you'll encounter in a single level is 5, and the highest number is 43, which does not include the databases. If you remember, earlier on in the episode I mentioned mutated databases, and you'll know how many of those you need to destroy with another on-screen counter, and these will be between 0 and 3 in any given level. These are towering objects which float gently above the ground, and the very bottom part looks like half a datapod, a bit larger, but it goes crazy from there, becoming a huge yellow thing, square in the middle, octagonal at the top, mostly textured yellow, but with red shaded vertices and glowing blue triangles near the top. When you destroy one, 3 datapods are released. When this happens, your on-screen pod counter will increase accordingly. Once you've gathered up all the pods, including the ones hidden in the mutated databases, then you're free to leave the level and travel on to the next one. You'll hear
Datalink activated
and see the text, "The exit is now open," flashing on the screen. And this means that you should return to where you started, at your leisure, and get out of there. You enter and exit each level through the Datalink terminal. The Datalink terminal is like a pavilion, textured in light blue with a vertical bolt of electricity going down the center. When you enter a level,
entering highway
you start inside this pavilion in a third-person perspective and are automatically driven out, and then the doors close behind you, 1 door per side, so 4 total. As you enter each level through the Datalink, it's entirely possible that Override has left a welcoming committee for you, so you'll be thankful that you get a few seconds of invulnerability, around 5 or 6 seconds, I think, once you start, and your energy gauge will be flashing between red and yellow during this time. After you're pushed out of the Datalink terminal, these doors will remain closed until all the pods have been collected, after which point you just drive in to finish the level and move on. After entering the Datalink, when you're done with the level, you have the tunnel sequence. This is kind of a mini-game where you fly your tank down a tunnel, adjusting the speed with the A, B, and C buttons on the controller. A is faster, C is slower, and B resets the speed. Hold down A or C for more speed or less speed to an extent. And your goal here is to collect, I'll call them pods for lack of a better term. They don't look much like the virus-laden data pods that you collect elsewhere. These are yellowish, sort of look like two cones, pointy ends out, connected by a cylinder. Maybe these are the good pods, the ones without viruses. If you collect at least 75% of the pods you encounter, you'll be awarded an extra life. There's a timer here, 60 seconds, and the sequence ends when the timer expires. The Datalink tunnels come in 6 different shapes, and some are definitely harder than others. The tank gets full energy upon entering the Datalink, and you'll find an increasing amount of debris floating around inside, even projectiles of some sort as you progress through the game. These cause damage, and if your tank is destroyed in the Datalink, the sequence is over, but it does not actually cost you a life in-game. It's kind of the opposite of what we learned in The Matrix and A Nightmare on Elm Street. If you die here, no big deal, you're cool. In the game, though, you start out with 3 tanks. The number on screen indicates the total number of tanks, not the tanks in reserve. When a tank is destroyed, it blows apart in spectacular fashion, and if you have any tanks left, reforms with the text regenerating on the screen. You don't have to start the level over again, you can continue on right where you were, which was probably in the line of fire, the enemy still shooting at you, so hopefully while you were watching your tank explode, you were also planning your getaway. You do get a few seconds of invulnerability after your tank regenerates. When all of your tanks are destroyed, it's game over. The silvery textured words "game over" scale in to dominate the screen.
Game over.
If your score was high enough, you get the high score entry screen. Here's what it looks like. There's a green background, the pseudo word high scores, HISCORES at the top, and a 9x4 grid of letters and symbols below that. Below the grid there's your name, which defaults to player 1, and at the bottom the text "Well done, you have earned a high score," this time spelled HIGHSCORE, all one word. You navigate the grid with a D-pad, pushing a button to select the highlighted letter. The right side of the grid contains controls, 2 sets of angled brackets that let you move left or right across your name so that you can make edits. There's a CA option to clear all, blank out the current name, and then a carriage return arrow in the bottom right corner to accept the name as shown and save it to cartridge. You can choose the letters A through Z, of course, and there's also a space, hyphen, exclamation point, and the numbers 1, 2, or 3. And your name can be up to 9 characters long. You've got 9 spaces to work with. So there are, as I said, 20 regular nodes in this game, and each one has a name. Alpha Matrix, Data Core, Central Web, Outer Ring, Home Node, Core Dump, and so on. The last regular level is named Decision Vector, and once you complete that one, you're on to the Override Central Block. How the final showdown works and what happens if you win, I think I'll wrap that in a spoiler alert, just in case you wanted to preserve the surprise for yourself. Bishop, activate spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 4 minutes on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
You enter Override Central Block much like you do any level, and though your tank is, by this point, likely glistening with weaponry, you won't be using any of that here. All you've got is your targeting reticle, your steady aim, and 50 of your favorite data pods from your vast collection, which, by my count, should be 567 by this point. Wow. Good job, you. So, as you enter the level, you see the text, "Shoot data pods into open collectors to defeat Override." And you see 3 sort of spherical containers moving up and down at different times along the back wall. Each collector has a square blue door in the middle made up of 4 triangles, and these occasionally open up. Along the top of the screen is a green bar split into 4 sections, each with a number and a title. The titles are left, central, right, and pods left. That's left as in remaining, not left as in opposite of right. Left, center, and right each have a value of 10, and pods left has a value of 50. You move your crosshairs around the screen, they move smoothly rather than snapping into position or anything, and push the B button to hurl a pod. If you get a pod into an open collector, it'll gulp, and the doors will close a couple times, almost like it's chewing on the pod. Also, the counter for that container, left, center, or right, will decrease by 1. If you miss, the pod will explode wherever it ends up landing. When a single collector has been force-fed 10 pods, it'll explode. Now, if you're doing the math here, with 10 pods per collector, you can only miss 20 times and still fill all those collectors. Oh, and the collectors move faster up and down the more pods you've collected. Oh, and there's a timer in the top left corner of the screen. It seems to start at 1 minute 58 seconds, so you have under 2 minutes to successfully land 30 pods in increasingly fast-moving collectors. If you don't have enough pods remaining to possibly defeat Override, if you've wasted too many, the game will stop you with the text, "You have run out of pods. You cannot defeat Override. You have failed." If you still have pods remaining but run out of time, the text will read, "You have run out of time. You cannot defeat Override. You have failed." Either way, it's probably off to the high score screen for you, which I described earlier. It doesn't matter how many extra lives you have at this point. If you fail to defeat Override, it's game over. I hope you saved recently. Fun fact, you can actually still continue lobbing pods when you've technically lost, when the time has expired. And there was one time that I had almost beaten Override. I had 1 collector left, plenty of pods in reserve, and the last collector needed only 2 more. Time had expired, but I continued pumping pods into the last collector until it exploded. It was easier because it didn't speed up. I still lost, though, which is fair. But if you do win, if you fill up all 3 collectors, you get the text, "Well done, Override is destroyed," and after a few seconds you get a new screen and some new music. You see a full-screen, pre-rendered image showing a structure with steps or terraces leading up to a bright light and some sort of massive cylinder overhead, flanked by narrow towers on either end. I don't know what this is, but some green text starts to scroll up from the bottom, and it reads, "After a great battle, the tyranny of Override is no more. The Eyeway is saved through your bravery. A grateful world can live without fear once again. Until next time." The text will scroll off the top, and then it's off to the high score screen.
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is spoiler-free, but still prejudiced against Override, whom I think was sadly misunderstood.
All I've been describing so far is the single-player campaign, but iWar actually comes with a 2-player mode as well, though you wouldn't really know it by reading the manual. This is a one-on-one deathmatch-style battle in a specifically designed arena full of doors, a couple teleporter pads, a switch-activated jumper with platforms overhead, and several other obstacles. The 2 players play in split screen, top and bottom, each equipped with a light tank and a Mark I laser. You have no other weapons, and there are none to be found in the arena, which is too bad. Each player has 3 tanks, and the first to lose all 3 loses the match. You see the game over graphic just like in single player, and might hear
Game over.
And see the text, "Congratulations, player 1 wins," or player 2 wins depending on which player, won. You see this on a screen very much like the one that follows the tunnel sequence. I realize I haven't described this yet. Briefly, this is your tank surrounded by circular ribbons of red, spinning between 2 points in a large rotating chamber. Push a button here to go back to the main menu. It'll wait for you to do so. Some of the interesting things about 2-player mode. You cannot change your view at all, and contact with the other tank causes damage to both. So before you prepare for ramming speed,
Prepare for ramming speed!
make sure you've got more energy than your opponent. Also, I think it'd be cool if you belted out that line in your best Commander Worf impersonation before doing so. Moving your tank around in iWar uses the D-pad. Up and down for forward and backward, and left or right will turn your tank in that direction. There is no strafing moving sideways in this game. It's move, turn, move, turn. Easier for a novice to pick up, but frustrating perhaps for veterans of first-person shooters. The fire buttons are configurable, with the defaults being B to fire, A to cycle weapons, and C to activate shields. It's a layout that I think works pretty well. Wait, you might ask, why do I have to cycle through weapons like some Sega 32X owner when I have a whole Jaguar keypad to work with? And the answer to that is that the keypad is busy doing other things. The 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 buttons change your view mode. 1 is first person, 2 is third person from a distance, 3 is third person but closer, and 4 is third person but like right above your rear bumper. The 5 button is a distance view, often from above and to the side. It's like there are several cameras positioned throughout the room, and whichever one is closest will track your tank as it moves around. If you're thinking that, hey, that sounds a whole lot like the 9 button in Club Drive, then wow, impressive Jaguar game knowledge there. My hat's off to you. But there's more to the keypad than just changing views. The 6 button toggles the auto-targeting system if you have one. Now, typically, auto-targeting is super useful and picks the closest enemy. Sometimes, though, you want to ignore the bouncing Wallace for a second and blast the tank that's next to it but a little farther back. Push 6 to turn off auto-targeting, your reticle will turn green, blast the tank or whatever, and then push 6 again to switch back to auto. And finally, there's the 7 button to toggle the map. This is not like the map in Alien vs. Predator, it's not translucent, so I only turn it on to figure out where I am and to figure out which teleporter goes where, and I certainly don't use it until the room is clear of bad guys. Star and hash, when held together, will reset the game, and 0 will toggle the music. The pause button only works if you're actively in a level, which makes sense, and while paused, you can adjust the music and sound effects volume by selecting the horizontal slider for each with a D-pad and moving the gauge left or right. All the text is in green, the slider button is the same shade, the trough color is darker. Little arrows on either side of the horizontal bar indicate which one is selected, and pressing 1 and 3 at the same time will hide all this stuff, and pause again will unpause the game. The option button in menu or in-game does nothing, but if you push option while the game is paused, it'll allow you to configure the controls, which buttons are assigned to firing, weapon selection, and shields, which in this menu is named Special. If you're using a Pro Controller to play iWar, here's what you can get out of it. You can switch to the close-in third-person perspective with the left shoulder button. It's not terribly helpful, but toggling auto-targeting with the right shoulder might be. Also, the X button will toggle the map, which is handy. One more thing about the controls before I move on. In the Datalink tunnel, pushing up on the D-pad will cause your tank to pitch downward, and down will pitch upward. This is known in first-person shooter jargon as an inverted Y-axis. I tend to prefer this control scheme, personally, but I keep forgetting that that's how it behaves here in iWar, and there's no way to change it. Despite the heavy keypad usage, the game did not ship with an overlay, nor is there an overlay design in the manual. Atari Age user P. Boland designed up a custom overlay for iWar, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. iWar boots up unlike most other Jaguar games. There's no separate vanity or licensing or copyright screens that you have to sit through. It's just straight to the iWar title screen. And what a title screen it is. It appears along with the music, which is also pretty awesome. The title screen is a very high-resolution image, among the best you'll find on the Jaguar, I think, and it shows a pre-rendered image featuring a room in iWar, gray textured floors and walls with red angular upright structures interspersed along the walls, and a sky that fades between blue, cyan, green, and yellow. There's a blue and gray tank with yellow and black caution stripes on certain parts. I can't quite tell if the tank is coming or going, but off on the left is a tower shooting a laser blast at the tank, the laser bolt highlighted by a lens flare. The name of the game, iWar, is top and center in a metallic sort of font, all caps. The letters in WAR are joined together, especially the W and the A, which share a slant. The name has a glowing yellow background. Down in the bottom right corner is a spinning tile. It shows the Magitech design logo on one side and the Atari logo on the other. It's a pre-rendered animation that shows some reflected lights as it spins. The bottom of the screen shows the copyright information, copyright 1995, Magitech Design Inc., licensed to Atari Corp. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sit here, listen to the music, not push any buttons, and see what happens. After 30 seconds, we switch to the briefing screen. The background looks like a worn and scratched green surface with light reflecting off the bottom left corner mostly. We'll be seeing this background throughout the game in the menus and other non-gameplay screens. Text at the top of the screen says briefing, and below that the word database, above a green grid where we'll see the story text displayed. To the right there are a pair of technical-looking displays, one that looks like a radar system, a circle split radially into 8 segments, and parts of these segments will light up in a repeating sequence. Below the radar thing is a horizontal rectangular grid with bars along the X and Y axes moving around, and other little bits in motion. There are 4 pages of text that scroll up and pause for about 10 seconds in turn. It's the basic story behind the game, and I'll go ahead and read that now. After 20 years of development, the override mainframe, buried deep beneath the South Polar ice cap to aid its super-cooled megaframe brain, goes online exactly to schedule. I should note here that the word "its" is misspelled. In the possessive form, the word "it" is spelled ITS, but here it's spelled IT''S. I did cringe a little the first time I read this. Next page. Designed to handle the increasingly complex world net called the iWay, it has many technological innovations giving it huge processing capacity. Mankind and society become totally dependent upon it. Next page. Override operates for many years without problem. However, its, again misspelled, IT''S, databases, spelled here with a capital D and a capital B, its databases mutate and begin creating virus data pods, one word, capital D, capital P, that clog the iWay. Last page, no more corrections. An autovirus craft must enter the iWay and destroy the mutant databases. It must also remove the virus data pods that are blocking the iWay. You are mankind's only hope. After the briefing screen, we see a set of 3 objective screens. They have the word objectives at the top and basically give you a rundown of what you need to do in the game. The screen is dominated by a large rotating 3D image of the object in question and some text in the bottom. Oh, before I forget, the title text here and in the last screen and basically throughout the game is shown in a font very much reminiscent of the font used in the title font for Star Trek The Next Generation. Just more upright, Roman, not angled or italic. Actually, you know what? I think it's pretty much identical to the typeface used in the TV show Babylon 5. Like, if you remember on the station when they have a hard copy of something, first of all, it's not on paper, it's on a transparency sheet because the future. And the text written on that sheet is about the same font as the one used here in iWar. I know I have this font, TrueType font file floating around on one of my computers. If I can, I'll find a link to it and put that in the show notes. So back to the objective screen. The first one shows the Datalink, followed by a data pod and then a mutant database. These are viewed from above, which isn't usually the angle you'll be seeing them in the game, but you can figure it out. Data pods are symmetrical though, they look the same either way. Each of these objective screens are shown for about 9 seconds, except for the data pod one, that's around 6. After this, some gameplay. You see the non-interactive tunnel sequence that precedes each level, and then roughly 51 seconds of in-game footage showing someone playing Alpha Matrix with a light tank. During gameplay, the title music stops to make room for in-game music, so here you're listening to the appropriate tune for Alpha Matrix. The gameplay ends abruptly, and we cut to the high score screen, which uses the same green background we see elsewhere, this one entitled High Scores, HISCORES, one word. This is a scrolling list of names and scores, with Carl West at the top with 90,000 points, followed by 8 other names, each with 10,000 fewer points than the one preceding, and these are also the names of development and production staff, including A. Seed for developer Andrew Seed, A. Noble for Andy Noble, who worked on some of the art, Billy for Bill Newsham, Magitech producer, Teddy T for Atari producer Ted Takichi, and the rest of the names I don't know. Normski, Mad Fred, Snakes, and Kev-AL. The high scores are shown for about 17 seconds, after which point we return to the title screen, but this time around, after about a second, the high-resolution title screen squishes against the left side of the screen, making room for credits to start scrolling up the right, which is a neat trick. Mr. Seed posted on Atari Age in April of 2018 that this screen was 640 pixels wide, which makes it look a lot smoother. The credits are presented as white text on a black background, includes the names from both the Magitech and Atari sides of the coin, and runs for about 9 seconds, after which point the title screen stretches to reclaim that space. This pretty much takes us back to the beginning of the Attract mode, 30 seconds of title screen, briefing, objectives, and gameplay. But this time, we're shown the second level, called Data Core, and it runs a lot longer. I counted 78 seconds. Now, an interesting thing about this footage is that the light tank here is equipped with auto-targeting. In the actual game, you don't find that power-up for 3 more levels, so I don't think the player acquired it here through legitimate means. The third time around, the gameplay shows Central Web, the third level, for about 47 seconds, and then the whole sequence repeats from there. I've said it before, I do like a good Attract mode, and iWar has it all. It ticks all the boxes. So let me say, let me do this. Bishop, Skylar clip number 9, please.
Well done.
Yes, good work, you guys. But let's push a button here and check out the main menu. The theme song will continue playing as you move into the menu, unless you were watching a gameplay part of the Attract mode when you push the button, in which case it's the in-game music that'll be playing over the menu. If you do nothing on the main menu for 60 seconds, it'll reset to the title screen, which is, I believe, how it's supposed to behave according to the Jaguar development standards, and 60 seconds is a much more gracious timeout than were given by some other Jaguar games. Dragon the Bruce Lee story.
You should see a doctor about that cough. Scary.
So the main menu has the same scratched green background, same futuristic Babylon 5 style font for both the heading and the menu items themselves. There are a couple of animations going on here too, the first being a kind of miniature version of the rectangular grid we saw on the briefing screen. It's not the same, of course, but similar in feel. The other thing is a column of binary numbers scrolling up along the right edge. Bishop, what am I?
A total nerd.
That's right. And being a total nerd, I wanted to take a closer look at that binary, so I transcribed it and found a repeating pattern of 28 5-bit binary sequences. Aha! Have I perhaps stumbled upon a secret message hidden these 20-some years? So I converted them to decimal and checked them against the level codes. More on the level codes later, but no match. Then I figured if I added 32 to each of these, just one extra bit, then all of them would fall within the capital letters of the ASCII chart. So I did that, and I found gibberish. But amidst the gibberish, I see a pair of 3-letter words. RID, R-I-D, and Fez. RID, Fez. Secretly, the people behind iWar are not fans of those little red cylindrical hats with the tassels. There you go. Exclusive podcast information right there. Okay, so mostly I guess what I found is that I may have wasted about 20 minutes of my life. But anyway, the main menu, it reads Main up at the top and contains 4 items: Start, Load Game, Defense Viewer, and Options. Starting down with Options, this brings up a new menu with 3 items: Controls, Difficulty, and Main. Main takes you back, of course, and choosing Difficulty takes you to a new menu where you can choose between Easy, Normal, and Hard. The currently selected difficulty level will be flashing. Let's talk about these different difficulty levels. Compared to normal, under the easy skill level, the enemies take fewer hits to destroy and deal less damage to your tank. On hard, enemies take more hits and deal more damage. For playing on hard, though, you get more bonus points after a level. The numbers I found, they may not be perfectly accurate, but assuming you destroyed 100% of enemies, on easy you get a 4,000 point bonus, normal is 4,500 points, and hard is 5,000 points. Additionally, on medium and hard, you get extra points for each pod collected, 4 points per pod on normal, 8 points per pod on hard. You get extra points for each database destroyed too, but I don't have numbers on that. Continuing with the options menu, choosing controls will let you change what the fire buttons do. You see white text for select, fire, and special. Special here basically means shields, just like before in the pause menu. By default, these are listed as A, B, and C respectively, but you can push left or right to cycle through the button assignments and hit a button to save this change and exit the menu. Returning to the main menu, the Defense Viewer option brings up a separate screen where you can check out most of the enemies that you'll see in the game, 21 of them in total. A large grid in the center shows a rotating 3D image of the enemy in question, and below that is white text listing the name, the percentages for speed, firepower, aggression, and shielding, and these are all 0 to 99%. Move the D-pad left and right to cycle through these and push a button to exit. On the main menu, selecting Load Game will immediately load up the saved game. If you don't have a saved game yet, there will be text that reads, "No game has been saved to cartridge." Choosing Start from the main menu gives you the option to select 1 player or 2 players. Let's choose 2 players for now, and this takes us in-game with a split screen, player 1 up top, player 2 on the bottom. Along the top of each player's view, we see their energy level in the top left corner. This gauge, like all indicators on the top of the screen, is outlined in bright green, and this one is basically split into 2 sections, a 3-digit number for your energy level, and then a segmented horizontal bar to give you a quick visual indicator of the remaining energy level, yellow when full. For the 2-player mode, both have the light tank, so 500 energy units to start per player. To the right of the energy gauge is the number of tanks, 3 to start. There's a little icon of a tank, like a traditional modern-day tank with treads and a turret, not the fancy antivirus tanks that you drive in the game. In the top right corner of this screen is your current weapon. The far right shows the count, a 3-digit number showing the remaining uses for that weapon, and to the left of that is a wireframe picture of the weapon and the weapon's name, like Laser MK1 for Mark I. Since lasers are infinite, these are shown with a count of 0. 3 zeros, actually. For other weapons, though, like mines and missiles, they won't show up here if they're empty. As you cycle through the weapons with the A button, it'll skip the empty ones, which makes sense. Just to the left of the weapons display is the shield indicator, a yellow inverse teardrop shape with a 2-digit number showing the remaining uses. The indicator is yellow when full and fills from the bottom up as it recharges. But of course here in the 2-player game there are no shields, so this gauge isn't really necessary. Neither is the weapons indicator, for that matter, because you only get the 1 weapon. But these gauges along the top are nice and symmetrical, so I like them. If you choose to go with a 1-player game, you first get to select your tank. The select screen will show a rotating 3D picture of the tank, pretty much in its fully loaded configuration, with 3 little bar graphs indicating the speed, weapons, and shield for each tank. Push the D-pad left or right to choose between light, medium, and heavy tanks. And this part is a little slow. You'll have to wait for each tank to scale up to full size before you can select it or choose a different one. Upon selecting a tank, though, you're shown the tank configuration screen, formerly known as the shop. Here you have a 3D image of your tank on the right, and a 3D view of the weapon on the left. There's a pulsating square indicating the location of the current weapon on the tank itself, and every few seconds the weapon changes, with the tank rotating to show the location of the weapon. At the bottom of the screen we see the text, "Press B to exit." But really, pressing any fire button will work. Otherwise, you cycle through all the weapons and equipment on your tank, including things like radar and auto-targeting and stuff. So, push a button here and you're taken through the Datalink conduit and into the next level. The tunnel forms around the tank, and the tank itself forms as each polygon grows from a point and fills into its full size within about a second. It's a really neat effect, as I said before, and it's used throughout the game, both growing and in reverse, shrinking back down. This tunnel is not interactive, and lasts only for a small number of seconds. Text at the top of the screen will read, "Prepare for node," and then the node name. So here to start, it's "Prepare for node Alpha Matrix." The screen will dissolve as the polygons shrink down, and when they rebuild, it'll be in the actual node with your tank inside the Datalink terminal.
Entering highway.
Let's take a look at the indicators at the top of the screen. These are just like the ones you see in two-player mode, except there's more here in single-player. To the left of the shield indicator is your score in blocky yellow numbers. You get points in-game for collecting pods, destroying databases, and grabbing upgrades. Not for destroying enemies. A pod will get you 1,000 points, a database is worth 2,000, and an upgrade is good for 250 points. And when I say upgrade, that excludes the energy pods. It's just weapons and enhancements.
Edit.
After recording this, I needed to go back into the game to capture some sounds, and I noticed that when you shoot a rocket and the rocket explodes, you get 5 points. So, yeah, kind of weird. 5 points for shooting a rocket. Interesting.
End of edit.
Enemies, all the tanks and launchers and things, you don't get any points for those. Below the energy gauge to the left, you have the word databases along with a number, the remaining number of databases to be destroyed. And opposite this, on the right side of the screen, you have the same thing but for datapods. Centered between these, in a white, technical-looking font, you have the name of the node. In the very center of the screen is your targeting reticle. It's shaped kind of like an asterisk, with both a plus sign and an X overlaid on each other, with segmented bits forming a white circle in the very center. When auto-targeting is equipped and enabled, this entire thing, except for the very center, will be red, and the plus shape will move as it tracks an enemy. The X shape remains in the center. When auto-targeting is not enabled, or when you don't have it yet, then the reticle is green instead of red. Around the bottom center of the screen is your radar scope, if equipped with a radar. This is a dark translucent octagon, mostly framed in white, and how they did it looks pretty sharp. There's a plus sign in the center of the radar indicating your position, and the little dots, if any, rotate around the center as you turn your tank. When your tank takes damage, your viewing angle will jerk slightly to the side like you're cringing, which is kind of a neat effect. Otherwise, it could be difficult to tell when you're getting hurt. You could see your energy gauge drain from right to left, but nothing else in terms of visual indication, no reddening screen or indicator of where the damage is coming from, left or right or behind you. So that little cringing animation is good. After you complete a node and enter the data link, your energy gauge remains the same, recharged to maximum, and the weapons indicator on the right now contains the word bonus in green and a number in yellow indicating the percentage. If you catch each pod in the tunnel, this will stay at 100%. As you miss them, this number drops. Centered at the top of the screen is a large timer, counting down the seconds remaining in this bonus stage using blocky red letters that fade to white in the center. In later levels, as I said, there's debris, textured chunks of stuff, and this causes damage, so do bright bursts of energy that come down the tunnel as well. Lose all your energy, and the bonus wave ends prematurely with everything dissolving around you. When the tunnel sequence ends, either by timer or by damage, you'll see your tank encased in 5 circular red ribbons. The tank is rotating, the ribbons are rotating, and the entire screen is rotating. You're looking inside a sort of chamber, and the tank is suspended between 2 points, coming down from the ceiling and up from the floor in the center of the chamber. If you captured more than 75% of the Datalink tunnel pods, then the screen will read "Well done" at the top, and you have been awarded an extra life at the bottom. This lasts for a few seconds, we'll say 10 seconds, and then you see the mission summary screen. Same rotating screen, different text. At the top, you see the counts for data pods collected, databases destroyed, and a percentage of enemies killed. At the bottom, you'll see the bonus score, which I sort of described earlier. Below the bonus score is your total score, to which the bonus points are slowly added. After a little more time, I counted 13 seconds, or when you push a button, you're given the option to save the game in progress or continue without saving. The question is, do you wish to save the game or continue, with the options navigated with the D-pad being save game or continue game. If you save, the screen will say saving mission status, and then it's back to the tank configuration screen and on to the next level.
Entering highway.
The game is rendered mostly in ground-shaded polygons, and what this means is that you can have an object made up of a small number of polygons, but instead of clunky flat sides, you have smooth shading between them, so that it can be hard to tell where one ends and the next begins. The Jaguar is very good at this, so this is why Andrew Seed and Carl West were wanting to build a game around this look. But Atari wanted textures. Textures were the new hotness, and Imagitex developers were against this. They knew that there would be a big performance hit. But Atari was the one writing the checks, so iWar has a mixture of ground-shaded and textured polygons. How this looks in any given room and any given node, what you'll see is a shaded floor, typically, and shaded walls. The walls are made up of a number of polygons, giving it an angular feel, and these rooms have different designs to make them distinct from one another. And among these designs are chunks with textures on them, perhaps tall angled pillars looming overhead, the sides have textures on them, that sort of thing. For the most part, above the walls, there's blackness, no rendered sky or anything, which, makes sense, you're in a computer. But there is one type of room that has some roof pieces. It was very cool when I first encountered it, but not very fast. And that's the thing, according to Cybermorph developer ATD, the Jaguar does texture mapping a full order of magnitude slower than regular ground shading. So with the texture mapping used throughout the game, the frame rate here takes a definite hit. Rooms come in all sorts of different sizes and shapes and designs, and in general, the larger or more complex the room design, the lower the frame rate. In some rooms, it positively flies, crazy fast 3D here on the Jaguar. Other times, it crawls along choppily. Add in enemies and other objects and the frame rates can fluctuate more. Many of the enemies do not use textures, but a few of them do, namely the towers, but still most enemies are shaded. Data pods and databases are fully textured, or nearly so, and both bumpers and jumpers use textures. When a jumper is active, the frame rate drops. Enter a large complex room full of enemies and objects, and the game slows to a crawl. I don't have hard numbers, but I think the worst I've seen is about 5 or 6 frames per second. That's with me blasting away at a bomber overhead with a pair of Mark II lasers as I've just entered a new large room. Your tank itself can slow things down too. Any of the view modes besides one, anything from a third-person point of view, and the game will definitely slow down. Your tanks look great, especially when fully loaded with weapons, but there is a price for vanity. Not all of the rooms in the game are unique. I mean, come on, there are 200 total rooms in the game, so making each one distinct is a tall order, but while many of them are unique, you'll definitely encounter one design or another a few different times. The large green room with the floor spikes, the pink room with the curving walls and ceiling bits, the pyramid in the corner studded with jumpers. Still, I think the variety here is impressive. The maps, how they're laid out, those are unique per node, per level. Each one is different. Sometimes this actually poses a problem because some rooms may be displayed under your radar scope, making them pretty much invisible. It's really hard to see that there's even a room there. You'll need to expose the teleporter pad locations or be facing a very light colored surface in order to see it. Sometimes rooms can be partially obscured by the radar as well. I see levels where the room layout definitely takes this into account. They wrap around the radar scope location, and I see levels where it totally does not. Usually the rooms in the maps are solid gray, except for the colored squares for the teleporters. Sometimes, though, I've seen this change to green, purple, black, even pink. Sometimes while I'm watching it, sometimes not. At first I thought maybe this color change meant something, but eventually I decided, no, that's not the case, and this is just some weird little glitch. The explosions here in Jaguar are spectacular. When you destroy something, each polygon that made up the object blows out in whichever direction it's facing. This can be unnerving at times if you're face-to-face with a Panther-class launcher, for example, trading shots, and then a piece of it suddenly zooms right for you, but you destroyed it. It's okay. There's no damage from exploding enemy debris. When you shoot things, there's a shower of polygon bits. Your lasers, for example, shoot an enemy or a wall or anything, and it'll explode out on impact. There are pros and cons to this. The pros are that it looks cool, and that you can see if you hit something. The cons are that there's a frame rate penalty for this effect, and sometimes it's hard to tell if you're hitting an enemy or a wall. Sometimes your shots explode prematurely and unexpectedly. You think that they should clear this part of the wall or whatever, but they explode seemingly in midair. The worst offenders here are the bumpers. They have an effective range that far exceeds their apparent size on screen. You think you've got a clear shot at a tank, you're blasting away, but a nearby bumper is blocking it. The jumpers, too, when they're active, also can block your shots. Rockets can help with this, and the AI droid definitely helps. The AI droid has a higher perspective, so it can shoot over all of this stuff. Jaguar is a full 3D game, and by that I mean more like Quake than Doom. Some rooms have ledges suspended overhead or floating platforms that you can drive both on and below. This is the exception rather than the rule. Most rooms don't have these elements, but the fact that they exist at all, I think, is mighty impressive. Also impressive, the audio, sounds, and music. The sound effects are not in stereo, unfortunately, and while they are fairly limited in variety, I just love the sounds that you hear when you blow up an enemy. Coolest sound in the game. The music is outstanding, and it should be, with Alistair Lindsay and Kevin Seville behind it. These are 4-channel Pro Tracker style tunes, and aside from the title theme, we have 3 different songs for the levels. The levels cycle through these in order. The shop song for the tank configuration screen, a song for the Datalink bonus stage, and an overall victory tune. Surprisingly, there's a 4th level song that, unless I'm terribly mistaken, is totally unused in the game. If you look at the order of songs played from level to level, the sequence goes 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3. 4 never gets played. And I think I see the reason in the source code. In fileload.s, when defining the file names for the level music, both variables level 3 music and level 4 music are set to the same file name, level3.sng. Likely a simple copy-paste error.
Oh, that's too bad.
I think what I'll do here is put the complete level 4 music track at the very end of this episode so that you can check it out in its entirety. It's about 3 minutes long before looping. There's another music file here in the ROM, but not actually in the game, called Failure, which is much shorter, and it goes a little something like this. The mod files were ripped by ITK_TSCC. Sorry, if you have a better name, I don't have that in my notes, but I am including a link to all these files, the mod files, in the show notes. The level music is fairly long, the longest running for 4 minutes and 39 seconds before looping, and they contain between 11 and 17 samples. The title theme plays for 2 minutes and 33 seconds before it loops, also contains 17 samples, and some of them are pretty cool. The main melody actually contains 2 voice samples. It sounds like Debbie and Data. If it's not Debbie, it's saying I don't know what is. Oh, this sound is also pretty cool. Now, inside the Datalink, the bonus sequence there, the music may sound a bit familiar to you if you've ever played Defender 2000. The percussion loop in the Datalink sequence sounds like this. And in the music for level set 1 in Defender 2000, the percussion loop sounds like this. Yep, same loop. Pretty cool. Many reviews, and I'll get into these shortly, mention that the music in the game is great, and I'd be inclined to agree with that. Cheats and bugs. Other game-by-game podcasts out there have their robot voices announce each section of the show outline, like the Atari Lynx Handycast, so, maybe I could borrow that. Hey, Monty, can you help me out with the segment titles?
I don't work for you.
Right. How about you, Bishop?
It'll cost you.
I don't much like the sound of that. Hey, cheats and bugs. We've got cheats and bugs here. Here we go. Atari Age has a cheat code listed to enable extra options in the options menu. To activate this from the main menu, hold down the buttons 2, 4, 6, and 8 on the keypad. There's no confirmation that this worked, but if you go over to the options menu, you should now see 2 more items, node code and textures on or off. Now, when Mr. Seed and Mr. West were developing iWar, they included an option to disable textures for debugging purposes. This toggle was also added to the 8 button on the keypad at one point, but ultimately removed from the final build, so this option here does nothing. It's a pity, it really is. I'd love to see how this game ran without textures. The node code thing, though, that totally works and totally rhymes. This brings up a new menu where your 2 menu options are Enter Code and Start, and at the bottom it shows the node number that has been entered in yellow text, defaulting to node 01. If you select Enter Code, that node number changes to a 10-digit number, all green, except for the first digit, which is still yellow. Key in a level code using the Jaguar's keypad, and then select Start. If you enter the code correctly, the number will change to the node name, otherwise you'll see the message Invalid Code, and you can go back and edit it using the D-pad to move left and right. Hit Start on a valid code, and you're off to select your tank, and then on to the tank configuration screen. When entering a level this way, you always have a Mark I laser, but you can get other goodies for free, like a rocket launcher, shield unit, radar system, auto-targeting, and maybe a drone. As for bugs, I did encounter several in my rigorous playtesting. I've already mentioned a couple related to the maps, the changing background color, and how sometimes no matching teleporter pads flash on the map, and sometimes there are 3 matches when there should only be 2. In gameplay, I found that I had difficulty driving off of the corner of a platform. If I drive off the flat side, it's fine, but right at the corner, I can't move very easily. I got stuck in a bit of a teleporter loop in the defense segment node in the 2 rooms in the top left corner. I'd involuntarily jump back and forth between the rooms a bunch of times before I could escape. There was one time that my auto-targeting lock was too low, so I kept hitting the floor in front of the tank I was trying to shoot. Turning off auto-targeting let me destroy the tank and move on. This only happened once, but I thought I'd point it out. There are some occasions where you can use a jumper to launch yourself clear off the map. I saw a user report this on Atari Age, Kevin Cal, I believe, so I tried reproducing it and succeeded in one room on the node damage vector. If you're in view 1, you fall forever into the black. The other view modes, I couldn't see my tank, just what looked like a floor or wall somewhere, and I couldn't really move around. The only way out of this predicament is to reset the game. A review on Atari Explorer Online, which I'll talk more about later, said that When you save a game and then reload it, it may replace your rear-firing laser with an AI drone. I'm not sure I buy that, though, because at least in my playthrough, you find the drone before you get the laser, so to reproduce the issue, you'd have to skip the drone power-up, and why would you want to do that? I think the missing level 4 music should be considered a bug, and a sad one at that. More esoteric glitches: if you pause the game, wait 4 seconds, then unpause, you get a shooting sound. If you wait 5 or more seconds, it's a louder shooting sound. This only occurs when the music is muted, so it's really not a big deal at all. Along the same lines, if you mute the music and reset the game, it's sound effects only, as expected. But if you hit 0 to re-enable the music, it ends up killing all sounds. Everything is silent until you pause the game and fiddle with the volume controls. A lot of the bugs that I find when digging into these games, they seem to revolve around muting the music, which is something that most people don't do. So, number 1, I can see why nobody noticed or cared before the game shipped, and number 2, most people won't notice or care now either. Finally, one last bug that doesn't involve muting the music: if you reset the cartridge to defaults, trying to load a saved game fails, as you'd expect. No game has been saved to cartridge. But if you restart the game with a star and hash combo, and then try to load up the saved game, it'll find one. It'll find the last saved game before you deleted it. It could be that the Jaguar requires a power cycle to truly wipe the cartridge, but I don't know, I didn't test that. I wasn't brave enough to risk losing my progress. When I look at the box art for iWar, one word comes to mind, and that word is pareidolia. This, among other things, is the human predisposition to see faces where none exist, be it the man in the moon, Elvis Presley on a potato chip, Vladimir Lenin in your shower curtain, unless you actually have a shower curtain with Vladimir Lenin on it, in which case, I don't know what to say. Or another famous example would be an apparent ancient visage carved on the top of a mesa in the Cydonia region of Mars. Not true, just a trick of shadows, a fuzzy camera image, and a good dose of pareidolia. I say this because for the longest time I thought that there was a face in the middle of the box art, a grimacing female face. I had only seen the box art in thumbnail form, small pictures of the box. It wasn't until I looked closer and actually got my hands on a box that I noticed that there's no face in there at all. Not at all. So the artwork covers the entire front of the box except for the strip at the bottom where the screenshot and Jaguar logo lives. It shows a Datalink tunnel stretching off into the distance with a few data pods floating out of it. You're viewing the scene at an angle with the floor and wall pillars covered in circuit board-like etchings. A purple tank with red racing stripes is driving toward the viewer, firing its laser cannon, while being pursued by some enemies, also shooting lasers. Compared to the enemies in the game, these look more like Patriot mines than anything else, but Patriot mines don't shoot. It doesn't matter, it's box art. The pareidolia part for me comes from the tunnel and the pods in the center. The two upper pods look a bit like eyes, and the lower one is like a mouth, and the checkerboard pattern kind of makes a nose. So the face, if one exists, which it doesn't, would be looking up toward the top right corner of the box. The name of the game is in an oval in the top left corner. The oval background also looks like a printed circuit board, and the yellow capital letters in the title are pierced by a targeting reticle similar to the one in the game. A white Atari logo is included in the bottom left corner of the artwork, and on the opposite side you have the ESRB rating and icon indicating 1 or 2 players. The screenshot in the bottom left corner is squared off, showing the data core node facing down a nuclear gun tower and having just switched to view mode 2. The new style Jaguar logo with a white outline appears to the right of the screenshot. On the back of the box are 4 more screenshots, and in clockwise order. These are a rather large and fiery explosion in the code segment node. Is that real? a 2-player split-screen view showing a Datalink terminal in player 1's point of view, a Datalink tunnel sequence with a pod in the foreground, and a view of the data core again, this time showing damage critical with the database off in the background. The text on the back of the box is in English, German, and French, and the English copy carries the headline, "Big Jam on the Highway." Here's the text. Everyone's worst fears have come true. The supercomputer that handles the world's information is filled with mutated databases and lethal viruses. You must enter the highway, clear the clogged channels, and restore the system. Choose an antivirus craft to get you through the various attacks, challenging puzzles, and tormenting mazes. And good luck, you are mankind's only hope. There are a few bullet points here. True 3D world with amazing texture mapped and ground shaded graphics. 5 different views make you part of the action. 20 levels culminating with a dramatic final encounter. At the bottom of the box, you have the Atari logo, a Magitech logo, and a description of the ESRB rating, which lists animated violence. The cartridge label features the box art in the right 2/3, and the left third is solid black, with copyright text in white, and the Jaguar logo below that. The manual is a 3-language stapled monochrome booklet totaling 45 pages if you include the covers. This manual, it's not a good manual. It strikes me as lazy, to be honest. The layout is fine. It's got a light PCB background and a targeting reticle around the page number, but when it comes to the actual content, it does a poor job of describing the game in detail. What detail it does include is lifted directly out of the game, so the manual provides no new insight. Let me give you some examples. First, there's absolutely no description of 2-player mode. It gets a very brief mention as in choose 1 player or 2 players, but that's it. The manual lists out a subset of the weapons and upgrades. It shows a Mark I and Mark II laser, but only a Mark I for all the other weapons, and it doesn't indicate which ones have Mark II and or Mark III upgrades. There's no mention at all of the extra tank pickup, no description of the radar, and no description of the map. The diagram of the view screen ignores the shield icon completely, and the list of enemies looks like it was simply copied off of the defense viewer screen. You want to know what's worse than all of this? One of the developers, Carl West, they spelled his name wrong. Instead of Carl West, it's listed as Carl Vest.
See my vest, see my vest, see my vest.
I had to put a Simpsons reference in there. Mr. West was understandably not happy with this error, and despite the manual featuring 3 languages, the credits are only listed once, so there are no other chances to get it right. iWar does not appear in the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide, and I could not find any print ads specifically mentioning this game. So let's play some more music and move on to the reviews. A preview of iWar appears in the January 1996 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, about 92 pages after the review of the game. But we'll start with a preview. It goes through the story and some of the basic facts of the game. It's a fairly uninspired write-up, and though it includes 8 pictures from the game, each one is from the first level. The preview says that iWar is the Jaguar alternative to the PlayStation game Assault Rigs, and yeah, I could see that. Flipping back to EGM's review, 4 people contributed their own reviews, each rating the game on a scale of 1 to 10. The scores from these reviewers are 5.5, 2.5, 3.5, and 4.0. The best feature, they say, is Nut and Honey, which is a reference to a breakfast cereal by the Kellogg's company, Nut and Honey Crunch, which was out in the late 80s along with a series of popular TV commercials.
Wow!
What you eating, babe?
Nut and honey.
Oh, you can tell me.
The worst feature is You Name It, and the time to complete is Do the Math. That doesn't sound very complimentary, so let's see what the reviewers wrote. One reviewer said that, quote, iWar is nothing more than the combination of Cybersled and Cybermorph, end quote. Cybersled is an arcade game featuring, like, one-on-one arena-style vehicular combat. The two-player mode in iWar may be similar to Cybersled, but other than that, other than worlds made of polygons, I don't see many similarities. Cybermorph, of course, we covered back in episode 2. Continuing on, he says that the graphics are the same dismally dark polygons the Jaguar seems to reproduce so well, and that while the scrolling is smooth, the gameplay isn't really gripping. The next reviewer said that iWar is not even worth a rental, saying that it's, quote, simply nothing more than a graphically enhanced version of the old Atari 2600 game Combat. There's no excitement here, and even the bonus levels will put you to sleep. Another reviewer, quote, couldn't tell what were the pods and what were the enemy. He liked the music. Well, he said that it isn't all that bad, but the voice sounds as if it was from a speak and spell. It would have been good if it came out a couple years ago, he said, but in this day and age, it is just bad. And finally, the last reviewer said that the control is swift and the levels have some originality, but complains about basic 16-bit graphics and barely adequate sound. There's, quote, not enough visually or gameplay-wise to make it excel, end quote. Well, that was all pretty much scathing. Let's see what GamePro has to say. This is a tiny review, itty-bitty, a single screenshot, no pro tips at all. It says that, quote, standard tank shooting isn't bad, but it's ordinary, sporting average controls, unimaginative weapons, and flat backgrounds. Only the 5 views in the 2-player hide-and-seek match make things interesting, end quote. On a scale of 1 to 5, GamePro rates graphics 2.0, sound 2.5, control 3.0, and fun factor 2.5. Huh, tough crowd. Let's try Video Games Magazine. It looks like this review awards a score of 6 out of 10. The text of the review, which doesn't really fit in the allotted space, says, iWar comes across as a middling attempt at establishing a genre inspired by Jaguar games like Cybermorph and Battlemorph. It says iWar is inferior to both of these games, the crosshairs are difficult to manipulate, and it's, quote, not a very exciting game. Web-based magazine Game Zero in 1996 published a review of iWar saying it could have been another of Jaguar's elite, but falls desperately short with some slowdown and choppiness. It's fun for the first couple levels, the reviewer says, and he liked the objectives, the teleporting, and he said that the game in general has a nice retro feel, kind of along the lines of Atari's iRobot. He said that the music was standard techno fare, and it and the sound effects were just average. 16-bit sounding, I guess. He said a few more months of tweaking would have helped matters. Overall score is 12.5 out of 25, so 50%. Atari Explorer Online, January 1st, 1996, features a rather detailed and comprehensive review by Clay Hallowell, who called it both the best and worst Jaguar games he's seen. He mentions the nose-diving missiles, which, by the way, only seems to be a problem with airborne targets. He talks about the auto-targeting lagging behind the enemy. He says that often you'll clear a room of enemies without ever knowing what was in it. Gameplay is eerily similar to Cybermorph, he says, but pods are harder to find because the map doesn't indicate your current location, there's no handy arrow pointing to the nearest pod, and that pods don't show up on the radar at all, which isn't technically true. They do, but as I said, they show up black on a translucent dark gray background, which I guess for all intents and purposes is invisible. Hallowell goes on to say that, at first, iWar is the slickest, most professional-looking game he's ever seen on the Jaguar, and that if you were to simply stare at iWar and never play it, you'd swear it was the best Jag game ever. But once you play it, and I'm paraphrasing here, the polygon engine is loaded down at every opportunity with showers of polygon sparks and blooms of shards when you're shooting enemies, and the larger rooms are often the ones with higher architectural detail. He likes the music, but not so much the computer voice. In conclusion, quote, it's apparent that a lot of care and thought went into iWar, but it's undermined by an inadequate polygon engine and gameplay which is, while fun at first, ultimately tedious and repetitive, End quote. On a scale of 1 to 5, graphics are given a 2, first-class intro graphics, pathetic frame rate when things get busy. Audio is given a 4, awesome tunes from the Tempest 2000 guys, so-so but serviceable sound effects. Control is also a 4, couldn't be simpler. Gameplay is 2, the variety of weapons upgrades is fun, the stumbling around lost is not. And the overall score is 2 out of 5. Lots of promising stuff here, but the low frame rate and confusing navigation are the kiss of death for iWar. Let's check out the European perspective. I've got some German and French reviews here, provided and translated, of course, by Arethius of the Retro Gaming Connection. We'll start with Germany. The magazine ST Computer from February 1996 has this summary. On every level, the player has to shoot enemies and collect data pods like in Cybermorph, which means that this game offers little new in terms of gameplay than the free pack in Cybermorph. The frame rate is even lower. On the other hand, there is a 2-player split-screen mode, better music and more enemies, but are you ready to pay more than 100 Deutschmarks for that? Conclusion, all Cybermorph fans should wait for the official sequel Battlemorph, which was released in the US on CD just after Christmas last year. The scoring breakdown has graphics at 69%, sound at 76%, fun at 65%, and overall 68%. Heading over to France, we have ST Magazine, May 1996. Here's the conclusion. iWar is strongly inspired by Cybermorph, yet the game has some disadvantages compared to its unofficial ancestor. The ground surfaces are flat, while the hills and mountains in Cybermorph give it sort of a flight simulator look and feel. Here you do not fly, you drive. Your tank is clearly slower and less maneuverable than the Cybercraft. It's called a Transmogriffin. The shots are also not as pretty, they are even confusing. When you shoot under heavy enemy fire, the whole scene looks more like an explosion of triangles than actual laser beams. And overall, the game is less interesting and uglier. At the end, I will spend more time on a game that does not deserve it. If you really like this genre, get back to Cybermorph. You will spare between 450 and 500 francs, which is not negligible these days. The pros, not much. Cons, already seen better / not that pretty. And advice, avoid this one unless you are collecting Jaguar games, or the worst of them. Hey, speaking of Cybermorph, Bishop. Skylar clip number 6, please.
Ouch.
The scoring breakdown for ST Magazine, graphics 50%, sound 65%, fluidity 70%, playability 65%, interest 40%, and overall 58%. Links and Jaguar Connection, December 1996. The translated conclusion reads, I sincerely was expecting much worse when I plugged iWar in my Jaguar. Indeed, the game is quite enjoyable even if its concept is not new. There are lots of options that enhance the interest of the game, such as 2-player mode, but it is true that a little bit more textures would benefit this game. In the end, it remains a nice little game. This game is awarded 2 hearts out of 3, I don't really know what that means, but there's a detailed scoring breakdown here too. Presentation 69%, graphics 79%, animation 85%, sound 80%, playability 80%, length 86%, interest 78%, and overall 80%. For something a little more modern, we'll start with Bekan Atari, which is the fanzine Arethius runs. In issue number 4, Arethius sums up the game like this. The quote, there is more than meets the eyes, is very true for iWar. Quite ugly and rather simplistic, yet this game offers a much appreciated challenge and is quite charming at the end. Some levels will challenge your brain and others will require sharp reflexes. My biggest complaint would be the 2-player mode, which seems to be rushed and not optimized. At the end, it is not very fun. Big plus is the progressive difficulty curve that makes the game appealing. A nice game if you are not looking for a 64-bit showcase. For pros, he listed well-balanced difficulty and fun. For cons, we have 2-player mode is a shame, playability questionable sometimes, radar and map are not accurate. In the breakdown, technical achievement is 40% of the Jaguar's potential, and on a scale of 1 to 10, he gives graphics a 6, special effects a 4, animation a 5, playability a 7, music is also 7, sound effects 5, presentation 5, options 6, je ne sais quoi is 4, and the overall score is 58.5%. He also lists the fun factor as the fun, which is apparently a reference to the movie Rasta Rocket, which we in the States may know as Cool Runnings. I haven't seen that one myself, so the reference is lost on me. The French blog JagFan has a review of iWar penned July 2010, and here's the summary. Unfairly underestimated, iWar deserves more than just a quick sneak peek. It is a very good 3D shooter with solid gameplay and an overall okay execution, although the graphics are just average. Sometimes labyrinthine, sometimes surprising, and particularly addictive, 4 Jaguar J's out of 5 is the final score. Okay, the last 3 reviews are trending more positive. Let's see if we can keep the streak alive with the video game critic. We cannot keep the streak alive with the video game critic. He gives the game a rating of D, saying that the scenery is blocky and uninteresting, that it needs a strafe button in the worst way, and that most confrontations amount to trading shots until someone blows up. He likes the explosions and calls the music respectable, and likes how you can save your progress between levels. He says, there's not enough here to make you want to come back for more, and that it's the type of game you forget about the instant you turn it off. Reader average is more positive at a B- with 35 votes as of this recording. Just Games Retro, April 2009, has a review with a final score of 3 stars out of 5. It says the game takes obvious inspiration from Tron. Okay, this is something that I've seen more than once. Retro Gamer Magazine, which issue is that? 111. There's an article on Imagitech, and on page 34, a sidebar lists 6 of their best games and 3 of their games to avoid. Making the best of list is iWar, and the write-up here says that the game clearly took its inspiration from the cult Disney film Tron. You know, something I like to do after I watch a movie is to look up the trivia on IMDb. I find that interesting for the most part, but sometimes I see a claim which is demonstrably false. No, this scene or this reference in the movie was most certainly not a reference to this other thing. So I've become highly skeptical of claims like this, saying something clearly took its inspiration from something else. So I asked Andrew Seed specifically about this, and he said, no, Tron was definitely not an influence in iWar's design. So now we know. Sometimes I feel like I'm the personification of this old XKCD comic. Aren't you coming to bed? No, I can't. This is important. Someone is wrong on the internet. I'll find that comic and link it in the show notes. It's a great go-to comic that'll come up in your everyday life. Hey, back to reviews. On Atari Age, external reviews include the Video Game Critic and Game Zero, which I've already mentioned, along with a few others ranging from 50% to 70%, with an average of 60%. Atari Age also reports a rarity of 5 out of 10, so fairly rare, and if we take a look at eBay, we only see 3 recent sales, loose for $25 and complete for $50. There is one complete for $25, which is a great deal. Current listings, last I checked, there are 4, 2 of which are complete with a custom box for $60, and 2 new in box for $80 and $100. None of the Atari vendors I check seem to have a copy of iWar, so yeah, fairly rare and not cheap. I checked both the Atari Age High Score Club and Twin Galaxies, and neither had a high score recorded for iWar. My own personal high score is 735,496, and in building up that score, I formed some opinions about iWar, so for my take, gameplay tips, and your reviews, that's all coming up right after the music. I never actually saw iWar in stores, so it's a game that I knew came out, but, you know, in those largely pre-internet shopping days, if I didn't see it in stores, I didn't buy it. I saw the reviews and didn't pay too much attention to them, except for the one in Atari Explorer Online. Even if it's not a positive review, which it really isn't, I can definitely respect a detailed, well-written, and well-researched review. EGM and the like, I get the impression that they maybe played the first node and called it a day, but Clay Hallowell's review, that carried a lot of weight with me. I didn't buy the game until last year, middle of last year, when I grabbed a complete in-box copy of iWar on eBay for around $50 plus shipping. I plugged it in, of course, to make sure it actually worked, but didn't actually play it. I knew the game was coming up soon on the podcast, so I wanted, well, first of all, to actually own the thing, and second of all, I wanted to get a pure impression of the game from the ground up. So I made sure it worked and then put it on the shelf until after I was done with Power Drive Rally, and at that point, jumped in with both feet. The initial presentation is everything Clay Hallowell promised. It's very slick, great music, cool animations, and overall a very nice attract mode. The demo player doesn't show a whole lot of skill, but other than that, the out-of-box impression is great. My cartridge came used, of course, and it had a lot of crazy names in the high score table that, in the fonts that they use in the game, it was pretty much unreadable. I really hoped that wasn't the default set. That would have been a pain to read off on the podcast, but fortunately, after resetting the cartridge EEPROM, normal names appeared, ones that made sense. I should have loaded up the saved game that was on the cartridge, see what was there, but I didn't think of that until after I reset it. The first time I played iWar, actually played it, was in 2-player mode with my 11-year-old son. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, the manual sure doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the 2-player mode, and we learned pretty quickly that it's basically a one-on-one deathmatch. We learned about doors and switches and jumpers, but generally didn't feel like shooting each other, so that was it. The frame rate wasn't very good, pretty poor actually at times, but I didn't expect smooth action on a split-screen game, really. I started playing through the 1-player game, normal difficulty medium tank, and got through a few levels, getting the feel for the game, figuring out how things worked, like the map and the teleporters. I restarted with a heavy tank and used that to play through the rest of the game, spread out over several weeks. I might only have time for 1 or 2 nodes, but I save it and then come back a few days later. I found that I was really looking forward to my next opportunity to play iWar. I love the look of the game. First of all, the Gouraud-shaded polygons and the interesting shapes along the walls, which have a decent amount of variety. I liked the sound effects and the music. The damage critical speech is pretty annoying, but other than that, the audible world in iWar is pretty nice. Mostly, though, I wanted to see what weapons I would find next. The manual doesn't really tell you what you're going to find, so really it was up to me. Is there a Mark III laser upgrade? Mark III radar? Who knows? Not the manual, that's for sure. So I had some motivation to keep going. I needed to keep going to get all the information I could for the show, and of course I wanted to finish the game too. As always, I've put together a list of likes and dislikes. There are quite a few of both. So for iWar, here's what I like. The music. Love the music. I like the explosion sound effect that you hear most of the time when an enemy's destroyed. I like the overall look of the game, as I said, and the complaints that the game was drab or bland, those were unfounded, in my opinion. It's got that Jaguar look, which I find appealing. I like how if you lose a tank, you can hop right back into the action. You don't have to start the whole level over again. The explosions are neat, not quite Iron Soldier cool, but it's still pretty satisfying to see your target blow apart, especially the airborne targets. I like being able to save my progress and pick it right back up when I return. Load times are minimal, there's no real delay moving from room to room, and the level itself loads quickly, and you've got a tunnel animation to keep you distracted while it's doing so. I liked encountering new and different rooms. Just when I thought I'd seen it all, here's something new. I liked the end boss fight. It was totally not what I was expecting, but still pretty challenging. I like that the game is beatable by a mere human such as myself. After Cannon Fodder and Power Drive Rally, I needed something that I could actually win. And that's another thing. There are basically 9 skill levels in this game. 3 difficulty levels times 3 different tanks. The ultimate challenge, of course, is a light tank and hard difficulty, but you've got a lot of granularity in there. I only completed it on normal with a heavy tank, but I think I might go back through with a lighter tank. I like that there are no respawning enemies other than the Wellington drop tanks. So basically you have 2 game modes, shooting and exploration. Once you get through the shooting part, you can switch your focus to exploration, finding all the pods and power-ups that you need. And finally, it's got that je ne sais quoi that I mentioned was lacking for me in the Power Drive Rally episode. iWar has it. And now for the dislikes. The frame rate can be wildly inconsistent. There is some frustration to be found in very slowly trying to shoot the bad guys in one room only to have your tank whiz through the next. The level design could have balanced this out. I mean, simplify the geometry in larger rooms and save the real fancy stuff for the smaller ones. There are a couple of rooms with a pronounced checkerboard pattern across the floor and walls, and that's kind of annoying. Hitting a wall, I think, bounces you back more than it should. You can't really slide along a wall or other obstacle to line up a bad guy around the corner. Most of the weapons are fairly useless. I stick to my lasers almost all the time. I never use the mines, I never use the rear cannon, and I very seldom use the plasma cannon. Well, I take that back. There are times when the plasma cannon is genuinely useful. Let's say that you have a lightning gate or two with an enemy beyond it. It can't shoot through the barrier at you, but you can't shoot at it either. Not until the barrier drops. If you release a fully charged plasma bolt right when the barrier drops, you can probably take out that enemy in 1 or 2 hits. The mines in the rear laser, I think that would have worked pretty well in the original racing concept, the Dreadnought concept, but I just didn't find any use for them here. Using the missiles against airborne targets almost never works. I find that I have to keep moving myself around with respect to the dropship especially, but maybe the bomber too, trying to get one of those missiles to hit. It might work 1 time out of 10, but usually the only thing they hit is the ground. Like the video game critic, I did initially miss the ability to strafe, but I got used to it as the game went on and developed alternate strategies. More on that later. I missed the 4th level music track. I do like the music, but it could have done with some more variety, which this 4th song would have provided. The voices aren't great, but the real problem is damage critical. Maybe if it just repeated the phrase 2 or 3 times, that would have been fine, but I found myself backtracking in search of energy pods, more to shut up that voice than to repair my tank. The map feature has some problems. The occasional color changes are weird, the occasional odd mismatching gate, but it would have been very nice to know, if nothing else, which room you were actually in at the time. That would have made it a lot easier. Make it a different color, or give it an outline or something. That would have been super helpful. The radar is fairly useless. The next time I play through the game, I might skip that power-up in Alpha Matrix and play the rest of the game without it. The manual is lousy. How can something with so many pages be so useless? I hate when shots get hung up on things they really shouldn't. Walls, jumpers, bumpers especially. And since there's debris when they run into the invisible something, it's hard to tell if you're actually hitting the bad guy who is lined up in your sights. The textures do add a nice bit of contrast, but I really wonder how the game would have played without them, how much smoother it could have been. The story. I get the story up until the very end. The ending text doesn't make much sense to me, but I won't go into any more detail here because, spoiler alert. I think that's about it for dislikes. On this show, we use the No Swear Gamer scale for rating games, and this scale has 4 tiers. There's Hall of Fame, reserved for the top 5 Jaguar games, Solid for everything else you like, Meh for most of the games that you don't really care for, and Trash for the worst 5 Jaguar games. For me, I am giving iWar a rating of Solid. I had fun with this one. I enjoyed it a lot. Despite its flaws, it was a good time. It's got enough charm and gameplay that I'll come back to it later. GamePro sort of let us down with a complete lack of pro tips, so to help make up for that, I've put together my own list of hints and tips for playing iWar. Enter each new room with guns blazing. Override does give you a warm welcome almost every time you emerge from the Datalink, but there you've got a brief period of invulnerability. When taking the teleporter, there is no such invulnerability, so shoot first and ask questions later. Or never, whichever comes last. If you suspect you're taking damage and don't know where it's coming from, fire up a shield until you can get your bearings. Your weapons range may exceed that of your opponent's, especially for stationary targets. Pick them off from a distance if you can. The auto-targeting system is the best upgrade in the game, followed by shields. Missiles and plasma cannons are okay, the mine layers and rear cannon are pretty much useless. If you don't want to bother waiting for lightning gates to open up, activate your shields and plow right on through. Only use the map when you're next to a teleporter, otherwise it obstructs the view and slows you down. To take out towers safely, stay out of range, charge up your plasma cannon, and zoom closer to let off a shot before immediately retreating. Repeat as necessary. The AI droid is great at shooting over obstacles. And finally, when battling Override, aim for just below the top or just above the bottom of the collector's range of motion. Bishop had a comment a while back about Override being misunderstood, and I kind of get that impression too. And that's coming from me as a genuine meatbag, not a potentially sociopathic podcast robot with delusions of grandeur.
Hey, they are not delusions.
Why are there mutated databases? What does that even mean? If Override did such a good job for so long, why are we so quick to destroy it? Humanity wouldn't be in any better shape with no override, as it were with a non-functional override, right? Wouldn't it be better to repair rather than obliterate? Here's my theory about the root cause of all of Override's problems. Gamma rays. Stray gamma rays flipped cache bits in the processors, and the code to invalidate the processor cache was commented out. Or maybe that's just a recent story that went around. Link in the show notes. That's about all I've got to say about iWar, but I'm not the only one here. Listeners have provided feedback as well, so to start, let's take a look at the Jaguar Game by Game podcast page on Facebook. I posted a picture of my iWar box, which I stuck in my Christmas tree since it was around Christmas time, and I asked for your feedback. Here's what you said. Derek replied, "Never played this one, so I'll have to give it a Derek, I think this calls for a CNC Music Factory reference. Oh, or Arsenio Hall.
These are things that make you say...
That's all I've got. Randall gives iWar a solid rating. Thank you, Randall. Chad says, it starts off solid, but becomes meh as the frame rate takes a dive in later levels. I dig the music and aesthetics. I will put you down for both. 2 votes for you, Chad. Congratulations. I agree about the aesthetics. That helped keep me interested in the game. And yeah, some of the crazier, bigger rooms later on, those will definitely slow things down. Björn posted, sadly, a little too less variety of gameplay, and I would have preferred less textures to reach a nicer polyshade look and a higher frame rate, but still a solid game. I find it funny, Björn, that one of the reviews wanted more textures, but I agree with you that fewer would have been better. I think the shading ages better than the slow, chunky textures. Arethius posted, Shinto, please tell me you're going to start the episode by singing this song. Okay, so I posted some replacement words for the song Deck the Halls, going with the whole Christmas theme of the post. Deck the halls with garage shaded polygons and so forth. And maybe if I got the episode out before Christmas, I might have put those lyrics to music, but that wasn't likely to happen, so I didn't really plan on including it. 'Tis no longer the season. Roberth says, solid for me. As Imagitech's last title for the Jag, it's decent fun. The music is pretty catchy, though, and I wonder if it was composed by the same folks who did T2K and D2K. Yes, definitely the same people, and it shows. And you're right, this is technically Imagitech's last title for the Jaguar in terms of release date, but there's one more that I haven't covered yet, Pitfall, since Imagitech did the conversion, but while it has an earlier release date, it has a much later part number, so it's actually coming up much later on the show. And finally, Chris posted, CD1812 on Atari Age was the programmer for it. See if you can touch base with him. Perhaps an audio interview? Well, Chris, because of your suggestion, I did reach out to Andrew Seed on Atari Age, and he was gracious enough to answer my questions. But I didn't think I had enough questions to set up an audio interview, so I didn't even ask him about it. And I think I wore out my welcome, so I wouldn't really expect an audio interview in the future either, sorry to say. But thanks for the tip. I have seen Mr. Seed post on Atari Age, but I didn't think to message him, and I'm glad I did. He provided a lot of the background that was missing from the iWar story. Nothing on Twitter, and nothing in the forums. So, Bishop, did we get any text or audio submissions for iWar?
No, but there is general feedback.
Okay, general feedback is good. Please send those over to my screen.
Ready.
Our first message is from LehtMojo. He wrote, Dear Shinto, thank you for your excellent work on the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. The attention to detail and exhaustive research and description of the Jaguar library has been entertaining, and I look forward to future episodes. From saving my allowance and birthday money to buy a Jag from Incredible Universe, to hounding 1-800-GO-ATARI as to when Mortal Kombat 3 and Brett Hull Hockey would be released, the kid in me loves all the information you present. Sure, these and other promised games were never released for the Jaguar on time or ever, but the existing collection of software has many unique titles that firmly entrench the system to the mid-90s aesthetic that is fun to look back upon. In juxtaposition to the more successful systems of the day, owning a Jaguar was like owning a Frank Zappa album, while Nintendo and Sega's offerings are more like owning Abbey Road or Back in Black. Everyone had them, but they are all missing out on something, a uniquely different experience. In my pre-internet existence, finding any info on the console consisted of scanning through the video game rags of the day, whose limited coverage was disappointing to say the least. Still, I enjoyed the Jaguar and spent many hours playing through the good and the bad. From the glitchiness and unwieldy controls of Club Drive to the suffocating atmosphere of Alien vs. Predator, there was plenty to explore. Personal favorites were Doom, Rayman, Iron Soldier, Power Drive Rally, and Fever Pitch Soccer. I still own my Jaguar and the 20-something games in my library, which is set up and ready to go should I ever get the itch. One game I'm afraid to say that I've never played, and certainly can't justify the price for now, is Tempest 2000, and I'm well aware of its praises as the system's best. Oh well, I also owned the Lynx for some time, but I believe my little sister used the wrong AC adapter and fried the thing many years ago. I still own games for it, but never really got into it enough to repurchase. Keep up the great work and be very careful of that little robot assistant of yours. I'm not so sure I trust it. Thanks, LehtMojo. Bishop's harmless, aren't you, Bishop?
Yes. Harmless.
See, nothing to worry about. I totally agree with you about the Jaguar's unique titles and the mid-90s aesthetic. That's one of the things I love about it. And iWar here is an excellent example, I think. Those are good games that you listed off, though I have to say I haven't played Fever Pitch Soccer yet. But I guess I'll need to do that before episode, Bishop? Which episode is Fever Pitch Soccer?
Fever Pitch Soccer is currently scheduled for episode 47.
47. I've still got time.
A whole lot of time.
Quiet, you. Tempest 2000, I really hope you're able to find a copy at a reasonable price, especially if you liked the original Tempest in the arcade. The whole audio-visual experience with Tempest 2000 is outstanding. But you know all this already. Keep your eyes open, though, and you might luck out. That's too bad about your Lynx. I can't say I've encountered many power adapters that have the same little connector as the Lynx, but yeah, use the wrong one and you might get some magic smoke out of it, but that'll be about it. I love my Lynx. I've got a long history with it, and I talk about it all the time on the Atari Lynx Handycast, so I'll put a link to that podcast in the show notes if you're interested. Lynx's... You'd be hard-pressed, I think, to find a Lynx in good condition for less than $100 these days. You know, not calculating for inflation, that's what my Model 1 cost, brand new, back at Toys R Us. You mentioned Incredible Universe. I love that store. It was a little bit too far away from me, so I only went there a couple of times, but man, they had everything there. All manner of consumer electronics and video games. Thank you for your feedback, LehtMojo, and for sharing your story. I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast. I really am. And finally, there is general feedback from... Oh, this one is from Ben. I wonder sometimes whether or not I should read certain feedback on air, unless specifically asked not to. It's kind of ambiguous.
This message did not get moved to the done folder.
Yeah, I know. I kept it around because I meant to reply over email, but,
You didn't.
No, I didn't.
This was 4 months ago.
I know, I have no excuse. So, Ben says... Hi Shinto, I just discovered your podcast and I love it. It's a very strong format and I really appreciate your personal style and commitment to your family. Also, it's easily the most in-depth retro podcast I've come across. Thank you and keep up the excellent work. And I replied to that where I thanked him for the kind words and asked him how he discovered the podcast, and he replied, I use Podcast Addict for Android and I usually find retro podcasts when I'm interested enough to put a game title in the search engine and see what comes up. In your case, it was AVP. I did this because I just listened to a UK podcast called The Retro Hour. Have you heard of it? Lots of Atari interviews in their back catalog. I listened to episode 71, which is an interview with Daryl Still, who was a marketing manager for Atari UK when the Jaguar launched. He mentioned the Edge magazine 4 out of 10 score for AVP and how frustrating that was to his team. I remember reading that review and how it was pretty much the final nail in the coffin of my wanting a Jaguar. I never did get one, but I decided it was time I at least emulated AVP to get the real feel for what I missed. I only previously played it for about 10 minutes in a department store in 1994 and dismissed it because the aliens didn't die from one shotgun blast like the side-scrolling arcade shooters I was used to. And yes, I do look back and cringe about judgment calls like that. I was so impressed with the AVP episode that I'm going to listen to the whole backlog. I'm only about halfway through the Cybermorph episode now, a game I never liked, and I'm wondering if I should give it another chance too. Thanks again for what you do. I really like the detail and the tone of your show. And this one I never replied to.
You did not.
I did not. So I'll rectify that now. Thanks, Bishop, for bringing it up. Yes, I do listen to the Retro Hour podcast, and the Daryl Still interview was great. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I've still got one episode sitting in my podcast queue from the Retro Hour. I haven't listened to it yet, but it's an interview with Bullfrog, and I've got a couple Bullfrog games coming up pretty soon. So these interviews, yeah, they've been great for my research, and I do link to them in the show notes when I use them. I'm glad you gave AVP a second chance, and that's kind of true for a lot of Jaguar games. Some really didn't age well, but others, if you go back and give them a second chance, so far removed from the console wars of the 90s, you might find something to like in games that were dismissed or poorly rated back when they were new. That's certainly been my experience doing this podcast. Thank you very much, Ben, for your feedback, and I am sorry it has taken so long to actually get back to you, but I'm so happy you like the show and shared your story and are keeping an open mind about the Jaguar. That's all I've got for my coverage of iWar. Big thanks again go out to Andrew Seed for sharing the internal story behind the game, and Arethius sent in some questions about the game, and I might not have actually addressed all of them, so let me take a look. Hold on. Okay, there's a question about the two-player mode always being part of the game, and the answer is yes. In fact, in the notes I found in the source code, it says, "We have deferred the two-player mode until the one-player mode is back on track." So the two-player mode was de-emphasized at one point to focus on the single-player experience. Arethius also wondered if the deteriorating relationship between Atari and Imagitech at the time had any negative impact on iWar's development, and this might refer to that Retro Gamer article on Imagitech that I mentioned earlier. It details some interpersonal issues between some of the new Atari employees and Imagitech's Martin Hooley. So I asked about this, and Mr. Seed experienced no such conflict with Atari. Their working relationship was solid, and iWar was definitely not affected by the problems described in that Retro Gamer article. Okay, I think that's about it, so thanks again to Mr. Seed, and now that's it for my coverage of iWar. Except for the level 4 music, I haven't forgotten about that. I'll stick that at the very end of the episode. Coming up next time, we have Flashback, which is followed by Supercross 3D, Theme Park, and Super Burnout. If you have any feedback about these upcoming games or anything that I've covered so far, or the show in general, please send that in, text or audio, to the email address jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All the show links can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. The show is now listed on TuneIn, if you use TuneIn. I don't personally, but if you do, you can find it there now. I've got some story time, sort of, coming up after the music. This is totally unrelated to iWar, so if you wanted to head to the Datalink terminal now, I won't blame you, but whether or not you stick around for the bonus tunnel, as it were, please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles, so do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening. Welcome one and all to the Storytime segment. I am Seldom Surly Shinto, and joining me is Bishop.
I am always Surly.
Right. This is episode 26 for January 2019, and in this month in 2011, or one like it, March at the latest, I started listening to the Retro League podcast. I had a long commute in those days, and I passed the time by listening to podcasts. I used my Nokia N900, which had a built-in FM transmitter, and I found an unused radio station and broadcast that through my car stereo. My car at the time didn't have Bluetooth, it didn't have auxiliary input, and the cassette deck stopped working, so my tape adapter was no longer an option. This was an older car, a 1998 model, and I'm not ashamed of that. That car lasted me until 2016, 18 years, with just under 300,000 miles. Great car, though I did eventually upgrade the stereo. The FM transmitter thing worked pretty well. There was a bit of static on occasion, and one time I was passing a big semi-truck, and he had his own FM transmitter, and it happened to be on the very same frequency, and his signal was much stronger than mine, so for a few seconds I was listening to his hardcore European techno. I didn't listen to many podcasts back then. I was just getting into it. There were several on howstuffworks.com that I listened to. Will Wheaton's Memories of the Future cast. I don't know if he still does those. The Retroist was around back then. 60 Second Science from Scientific American. And I wanted some more retro gaming podcasts. So I searched for the word retro in my podcast app, and a show called The Retro League came up. I downloaded an episode, and I liked it immediately because of the theme song. Back then, they didn't have a different opening song per episode. They used the same one over and over. And I'd play it for you now, except I don't have any of those old episodes anymore. I checked. I went through backups and everything. I signed up for the Retro League forums and got a mention, I think, in episode 83, or is it 84? And I participated on the forums a bit, sharing my Action Max story, and I also sent in several answers to their questions of the week. I shared the story about my first MP3 player, and the one about how my siblings and I set up a real-life Pac-Man maze in an office building while we waited for our parents. They had regular, long meetings there and left us to entertain ourselves. I talked about my Armatron Game Watch, and probably a bunch of other things. Never did win their Listener of the Month drawings, though. They had several great series which spanned multiple episodes. From episode 80 through, I think, 99, they covered the years 1980 through 1999. And they had a console launch series and did one for console last releases as well. The episode about the Jaguar launch, they paired that, I think, with the 3DO because they said the Jaguar didn't have enough titles at launch to warrant a separate episode. I think 4 was their cutoff. And I disagreed with that because they didn't include Dino Dudes among the launch games. It was just Cybermorph, Trevor McFur, and Raiden, and everything that I read, not to mention personal experience, indicates that Dino Dudes was a launch title. But whatever, I didn't actually complain to them or anything. After a couple years, I changed jobs, my commute dropped significantly, so even though I had more and more podcasts in my feed, I didn't have the time to listen to them, and the Retro League was just too much. Every week, an hour plus per week, it was just too much for me to keep up. So I stopped trying to listen to every episode and switched to a pick and choose sort of strategy. I'd go through the show notes, and if something stuck out for me, I'd download it. The Retro League influenced my own podcast a lot. For example, I don't talk about what I've been up to recently, and even if I did, I wouldn't put that in the very beginning of the episode. Now, to be fair, a lot of podcasts do that, podcasts I enjoy, but it's not for me. If I'm doing a show about a game, I'm going to assume people are tuning in to hear about the game, so anything non-game related, I push to the very end. Kind of like this. And speaking of the very end, I didn't want to list off a bunch of links at the end of the show, Facebook and Twitter and Stitcher and all that, so I started GameByGamePodcast.com so that I could just give out one single URL that has all of the links and pretty much nothing else. Easy to find. I know Retro League co-host Hugh is no fan of the Jaguar. He has an article on his website detailing the 10 reasons the Jaguar failed, but I might disagree, but I respect his opinion. In early December, I got an email from Adam asking if I knew what happened to the Retro League. I checked my podcast app, and sure enough, there was no new episode for the previous week. So I got to checking, and the website and forum were down, Libsyn was gone, but the domain name was paid up and the Facebook and Twitter accounts still existed. I had hoped that maybe there was a problem with the credit card that was used to pay for the web hosting service in Libsyn. Maybe it expired or was reported stolen and had a new number. Something like that could have taken out both services at the same time. But eventually, co-host Rob posted on Facebook that the podcast did in fact end quite abruptly, and for his part on his website, Hugh said that there were circumstances beyond his control. So that's it. 9 years is a heck of a good run, especially for a weekly show, and though I did stop listening to every episode, I will miss that regular retro heartbeat. The Mark I laser fires a shingle shot that shoots shingles. 20 levels culminating with a dramatic final encounter. Welcome one and all to the Storytime segment. I'm Shinto, with me as always is Bishop.
Party on Shinto.
Party on Bishop. Ah, shoot, wrong show. Also, I think it'd be really cool if you belted out your best Commander Worf impersonation each time. Prepare for ramming speed!